and economic instability across 5 continents.
The goal here is to really make people think about a young, overconfident on an expensive boat, rather than the pressing matters of substance that actually affect people's lives.
As Gilmer set off on his journey Thursday, something was happening in Washington. In local news, a cute 8-year-old is beginning to realize how much better she is than ugly girls.
Since I'm cute and they're not, that means that they're not as good as me.
In other news, a slaughterhouse worker is told to stop naming them all. And sure, an area man can watch your cat while his life is falling apart, no problem. You have just participated in a large-scale psychological research study. Please fill out the attached liability waiver and send it to theonion.com/newsbeat.
Our Matrix server is about as free as internet chat can be. Join the existing rooms or create your own at chat.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
It is Free Talk Live. Welcome to the program here. The phones are open and you can join us and bring up whatever's on your mind. The number is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. In the studio tonight, it's Ian.
And Aria.
And joining us remotely,
it's Mark.
Mark is here. Where are you tonight, Mark? Oh, you don't like to say those things, do you?
Secret location.
Okay. Well, it's good to have you here from wherever you happen to be on this new 2023 edition of Free Talk Live, which we discussed quite a bit last night in the first 2 hours. We talked about advertising, the advertising model. Is it dying? Is it going away? Does it even work anymore at all? And the only reason I'm bringing that up is because we actually already have a caller who wanted to weigh in on that particular topic. Nice. Otherwise, there's all kinds of other things for us to talk about, including Bitcoin's 14th birthday today. But let's go first to David in Georgia. David, you're on Free Talk Live. Go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. I'll make this quick. First of all, you guys were mentioning yesterday about YouTube, and YouTube takes 30% of super chats when you get a super chat.
Wow. So Aria was correct that if someone is going to donate, going through a Patreon, for instance, or some other more direct method is much preferred because the people who would benefit are going to benefit more.
Absolutely. Just send them Monero.
Yeah, it sort of amazes me. I mean, back when I did gaming streams all the time, I did have a little, QR code up there that people could send that people could scan in order to send me cryptocurrency, right? Mm-hmm. It amazes me that with YouTube taking 30% of the cut and other huge cuts of revenue from various sources on YouTube, ads and things like that, that more content creators aren't just slapping a QR code up there in the top right corner that it could easily be scanned by anyone watching it, and just like that, it brings up a Bitcoin wallet or whatever.
I think a lot of them do have Patreons. I think when YouTube several years ago...
But Patreon takes a huge cut, too.
11% is better than 30, but when YouTube started cracking down on channels, remember, like maybe 5 years ago, they started demonetizing people, and people who had sort of thrown all their eggs into one basket and were just living off of YouTube revenue were shocked. They were shocked because they figured that was, the gravy train was going to go on forever, and then all of a sudden it started drying up. That's when a lot of them started getting these alternatives like a PayPal or one of these other sort of accounts. But David, what else did you want to share about it?
I know that there is actually a Monero plugin, so like you can actually do like a super chat thing through Monero where you donate the Monero and then your little message shows up as the in the stream. And the other part was that you guys mentioned that Bitcoin.com had dropped their sponsorship after like a decade or something like that.
Yes.
And I was thinking you might want to take a look into the Monero.com/Cake Wallet. I actually talked on Reddit with the person in charge of that, and he said he'd be quite interested. So I gave him the link to your advertising page and the Mark's email address. So maybe he might be getting in contact with you guys. That's all I had to say.
We love Monero here at Free Talk Live.
Thank you. I would love to be able to use Monero again, but unfortunately, Aria, you and I are prohibited by bail conditions.
But I can still love it.
Yes, but you can email that contact information to me at mark@freetalklive.com. I want to follow up on that. Thank you.
Sure. Okay.
Thanks, David. Anything else you want to share?
No, that's it.
Appreciate it, man. All right, so Mark, any comments since we are just sort of rehashing briefly this sort of advertising discussion that we had last night? I don't know if you happened to catch it. It lasted for mostly the first 2 hours of the show. Do you think
It makes it sound so boring when you're like, we were discussing advertising, but I mean, we were discussing so many things.
Yeah, we were talking about television revenues going down, television viewership going down, people of a younger viewpoint just not responding to advertising in the same way, doing everything they can to avoid it. Is the old model dying? Is it already dead?
Well, there's a book written, and I think it was in the late '90s, called Where'd They Move My Cheese, or Who Moved My Cheese?
Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah, somebody moved the cheese, something like that, and it's just sort of looking at how business changes over time, and business is changing dramatically. And faster and faster. So when I started advertising, they would say that, look, hey, you got to watch out. People are getting 200 and 300 advertising messages per day. And, then by the time we started Free Talk Live, I was hearing rumblings of them cranking that number up to 1,000. And now I'm hearing that people are, getting 5,000 advertising messages per day.
What does that mean?
So, right now I'm looking at a computer and I see a Bitcoin sign. I see a Dell sign. I see a Jitsi logo.
Okay.
I see, the JVC. I think that's what that says. AOC,
the number of ads that you are being served, essentially.
Right. I'm being served all kinds of ads constantly. And, that's just how our modern world is. Now, do I react to any of them? No. The answer is I don't. I haven't gone out and I've never bought another Dell because this Dell has served me well, and it has. There's just all kinds of things I don't do that in order to get your customer, it's much harder than it used to be to brand, a given thing. Generally, when I buy tires, I'm going to buy Michelin, because at some point in my life, somebody told me you can buy tires or you can buy Michelin. And, that to me said that the most valuable people in my life can be kept safe with these slightly more expensive tires. So I'm going to buy those. But I mean, it's harder and harder to do in the world that Free Talk Live lives in. We're on the radio and the ads come in the middle of the talking time. We're not, in many cases, endorsing things. But even when we do endorse things, everything's constantly competing for people's attention. So I would say, yes, it's getting harder and harder to make your ad dollar make sense. And each advertiser has to be very creative in order to make their money back, and that's not easy.
On the subject of creative ads, I wanted to bring this up last night, but we ended up moving into a different subject. I'm reminded of the PlayStation 3 advertisement that was just a baby doll sitting in a room in a sterile environment, a very dark room. It was a super eerie commercial, weird, made absolutely no sense whatsoever, awful commercial. However, it got everyone talking about it.
You remembered it, apparently.
Well, no, I only remembered it because I recently watched a YouTube video about creative advertising. I was, just going on one of these random YouTube walks, right? Mm-hmm. And it happened to mention this one, which I had never even seen before. I don't even think I had a television at the time that the PS3 was out. But it was a very creative ad, but it was nonsense, and it didn't tell you anything about the PlayStation 3. Mm-hmm. All it did was get people talking about the commercial. And because they were talking about the commercial, they were talking about the PlayStation 3. And by that metric, it was tremendously effective. Yeah. However, it didn't do a thing to tell you anything, to make people interested in the PlayStation 3. But did it sell PlayStation 3s? I don't know. Probably.
When you're talking about a system like that, I think that it depends, right? Like, not every advertising is the same. So Dynovite was mentioned on the show last night, as I recall. And, with that, you're talking about a dog vitamin who advertised for a very long time with Free Talk Live. And, so you're trying to get one particular product sold. Whereas with a PlayStation 3, there's only 3 different consoles out, maybe 4, I'm not entirely sure. And people have to pick between them. There's mostly fanboys. You're trying to whip up excitement. You don't need to tell people that the Super Bowl occurs in January. You just kind of need to remind them and that sort of thing. So it depends on where you are, and that's why they have, Madison Avenue companies. And by the way, the vast majority of those people who spend their money with those Madison Avenue advertising agencies, well, sorry, but they're not seeing a lot of return right now either. It's very tricky.
All right. So anybody can comment, of course, on anything you want to. Here, the number is 603-283-6160. And today's a big day in the history of Bitcoin. Of course, we mentioned in the fall, it was, I believe, Halloween is the date on which the Bitcoin white paper was released. But the day on which the first block was mined, when the software actually went into effect, is apparently January 3rd, 2009, which was 14 years ago. So
pretty soon,
birthday.
Bitcoin's going to be 18, and libertarians won't be interested in it anymore.
Happy birthday, Bitcoin. Bitcoin.com from news.bitcoin.com has a story about it. They say that it was 14 years ago that Satoshi Nakamoto launched the Bitcoin network and Block Zero at approximately 1:15 Eastern in the afternoon on a Saturday. Satoshi's technology allowed, quote, online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution, unquote. Since Bitcoin was born, it changed the financial system significantly and has sparked an entire cryptocurrency economy worth more than $800 billion in value. And I would point out it peaked at over $2 trillion a year ago.
I just can't imagine if Satoshi Nakamoto expected Bitcoin to be this successful on that day 14 years ago.
No, how could she or he?
Just on their laptop, they were like, I've got this idea. I put it forward. Now I'm gonna start it. I'm gonna mine this block and see where it goes. And 14 years later, this is where we're at. Just amazing the trajectory that Bitcoin has been on, not from a value standpoint or financial value standpoint, but a utility standpoint, and how it's grown to serve the needs of so much of the world's community.
Yeah,
Thanks, Satoshi.
Yeah, absolutely. Whoever you are, Satoshi out there, and whether or not Satoshi is still breathing, we have no idea. Satoshi, of course, disappeared from the scene in 2011.
That person who's in prison in Bolivia or Venezuela or some whatever South American country that is, that's been one of the more compelling ideas I've seen for who could be Satoshi Nakamoto.
There are a lot of interesting theories out there. So far, we still have no real proof of any of it.
No, and I would never expect to.
I like Hal Finney. He was certainly involved very early on, and he also died. So wrapped up nice.
Yeah, he was one of the people that was definitely confirmed early on involved. It was Craig Wright, who's the fake Satoshi, the guy that has been claiming publicly to be Satoshi for years and has never proven anything to prove that he's actually Satoshi. But he was around in the early days along with this Hal Finney guy. And yeah, there have been a lot of people that have said Hal kind of meets the profile. But again, he passed away from some sort of medical issues several years back.
Well, realistically, anyone who was involved in Bitcoin, 14 years ago or even 13 years ago will fit the profile of someone who could have been Satoshi Nakamoto, because the only people who were into it in 2008, 2009 would have been people who were encryption experts and programming experts and just IT experts in general.
Yeah, and a good chance that those people were a little on the older side. There's been, for decades, this cypherpunk movement of people who kind of value anonymity. They value, in many cases, anarchism, getting out from underneath the government's system of money. And Satoshi's Bitcoin was sort of the culmination or the apex, at least so far. Maybe you could argue Monero was next in line for that. But Satoshi's was such an important development financially. I don't think we've even really started to realize how important it is. I mean, some of us may have some idea from a philosophical standpoint, but society at large doesn't really get it quite yet.
You mentioned Monero, though, and I tend to believe that whoever created Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, was also the same person who created Monero, because there's
an argument for it.
There is an argument for it, and there's some reason to believe it. And ultimately, it's just a matter of saying, I choose to believe that, because Monero is a improved version of Bitcoin. It follows along the same trajectory. It improves a lot of things. It adds more privacy, more security.
Yes.
And it seems like Bitcoin version 2.0 to me.
There are some people who say that whoever the person was that wrote Monero, also an anonymous person, by the way, in their writing supposedly writes in the style of Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, maybe that's a way for the person who wrote Monero to throw off, people who are trying to figure out who that person happens to be, or maybe it is actually Satoshi.
Like if I was writing something anonymously, one of the more obvious steps to take would be to use British English. Right,
which is what he did, or Satoshi did,
I think so, which is like to put a U after an O in the word color and things of that nature that an American wouldn't do. And if some person on the internet reading this would go, okay, well, this person's obviously British, and just like that, you've thrown them off your trail.
Right.
And that's such a simple little change a person could make. There's no telling.
It's also a way to just sound pretentious if you just want to go ahead and do that too.
Oh, if you really want to sound pretentious, use the word whilst.
Whilst.
Yeah. It does nothing that the word while doesn't do.
Just adds a T.
Yeah, it just adds the to it. And it sounds so
there's a
pretentious.
There's a distinction. There sure is. It sounds very posh. There's a distinction in English, but I couldn't tell you what it is off the top of my head.
Well, when I was doing
Reddit
editing, I looked into it, and these common threads seemed to be that there was absolutely no difference whatsoever, except that whilst is more used in British English.
So
so they use while and whilst, whereas we don't use whilst. We use while in two different scenarios, and I can't describe it off the top of my head.
When you say whilst, I'm not. Are you using the same word I am? WHILST?
You're right, whilst.
Okay. I've never heard a British person pronounce it whilst, which is what threw me off. Of course, I don't know any British people, so
the British accent, it's so wide and varied just within a very small geographic area, and it's getting even more wide and varied as time goes by because they all want their geographic distinctions to go. So I'm sure some say whilst and some say whilst.
I like the one where they put an R after every word that ends in an A. Like
they do that in Boston.
You mean with the pronunciation?
Yes, and I've seen so many threads of like British people claiming they don't even do that. It's like, how do you not hear it?
I don't know.
It's amusing to me.
So 14 years later, the Genesis block came out. It's otherwise known as Block Zero, according to news.bitcoin.com. It's the first Bitcoin block that bootstrapped the network. Block Zero is special because there are no ancestral blocks before it, and it was hard-coded into the software so it would have an official starting point, and every node can validate the blockchain from the very beginning. Because it's hard-coded, the Coinbase reward of 50 Bitcoin stored within the first block can never be spent. The 50 Bitcoin is stored in the Bitcoin address, and then they give it. And during the last 14 years, the address has seen a number of dust transactions sent to the wallet. That means at the time of the writing, the Bitcoin address has now 68.56 Bitcoin. So people have been donating Bitcoin to the Genesis block address over time. I did not know that.
I sort of understand. I understand, and I don't understand why someone would do this. Guys, Satoshi Nakamoto has plenty of Bitcoin.
Well, plus he can never spend it anyway. It's locked. Right.
So essentially, it's a way to burn. Is that true of the entire wallet, or just the initial 50 Bitcoins?
Just the first 50 Bitcoin.
Okay, but the other 18 point whatever that's been donated could be spent.
I don't know. That's a good question. What, Mark?
Maybe it's just like a wishing well. Why do people throw money into wishing wells? But they do.
That's a really good point. I like that. That's the Bitcoin wishing well.
Yeah. All right. So another well-known fact about Block Zero is the message that Satoshi Nakamoto encoded in the Coinbase parameter. The special field can be used to...
Did it say hello world?
No. It was actually an attack on the banking system. I'll share it with you here in a moment. The special field can be used to include an arbitrary message in the block. Now, of course, most people would never see these things, but because it's the zero block, obviously a lot of people have looked here. And the message said, quote, "The Times, 03 January 2009." So the date. "Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks." So it brings you back to what was going on in the world, especially in the United States and the UK at that time during the big semi-recession or whatever you want to call it, the housing market, of course, crashing at that time, and the US and apparently the UK government rolling in with taxpayer money by turning on the printing press for the bailout of, you remember GM, I think, got one, and of course the big banks got one for all their mortgages they were underwater on.
But notably, Ford was the only American car company that did not get one.
They turned it down, didn't they?
I think so. And I don't remember they just weren't offered one. I just remember making a mental note at the time and just being impressed that even though they could have gotten one, Ford declined it. And that's impressive to me.
The message has been interpreted in a myriad of ways, but mostly as a reference to the financial crisis and bank bailouts of 2008.
Seems to be just a statement of fact, right? Like, this is what's happening today.
Right. Well, now, some would say that this was part of Satoshi's reason for creating Bitcoin.
And I would agree.
Right? To take the power of money out of the hands of the banks and the governments of the world and to put it into the hands of the individual. This great decentralization of the money supply that is something that is such a threat to the status quo that we are now seeing a full-on assault 14 years later against Bitcoin and its adherents and its advocates and cryptocurrencies, the industry as a wider whole. The SEC, of course, attacking Ripple, attacking Library, and several other developers. The FBI going after people for simply selling Bitcoin online. Even those who actually got the government paperwork have been targeted. The guy
there was a guy in, I think, Texas.
Yeah. Risen, I think, is his name.
And he was ultimately accused of not having a state permit to operating a money transmitting business, even though his state, like New Hampshire, didn't require him to have one.
That's right. Yep. And he's now spending, apparently it was like, I think it was like a 15-month sentence, but they must have cut it back because he posts regularly to Twitter through his son, who's operating his Twitter account, and he's going to be out in like 60 days. So maybe he's just going to a halfway house, kind of like Cantwell did, or something like that. But still, the dude took a plea deal because the feds threatened to come after his wife if he didn't just take a plea, even though he did everything that he could legally do to try to jump through all the legal hoops. They still came after him. So it just goes to show that you are not safe. It doesn't matter. Like, think about Ripple. Ripple is, and when I say you, I mean like people that are trying to do something, not just users. The average user, there's too many of those. They're not going to put everybody in jail.
Well, they're also not trying to do anything, right?
Right. Somebody that's trying to create something, somebody that's trying to perform some sort of service, you are not safe. I mean, if you look at Ripple is this crypto that was designed to be sold essentially as a tool for the banks. So they've always been trying to curry favor with the government, curry favor with the banking system, and be part of the system. They're not like these outsiders like Monero or something like that. They want to be part of the system, and the system's coming after them. The system is trying to destroy that company, and they are destroying Library. And Library tried to tell the SEC. He said, the Library guy said to the SEC, look, just tell us what to do. We want to be able to comply with your rules so we can move past this and, keep building this technology. And they couldn't get an answer. There was no clear answer from the SEC.
If the government provides an answer, then they can't prosecute everyone. If they tell you exactly what's illegal, then you'll know what's illegal. You'll know what to do, and if you do it, then they can't prosecute you.
And let's not act like the government is one thing here. It's several different agencies which have several different definitions of what cryptocurrency is and all these sorts of things. It's not just difficult to find out what to do. It's completely effing impossible.
Yeah. There's more coming up here. You can join the show. The number 603-283-6160. It's Bitcoin's 14th birthday. Happy birthday, Bitcoin. We're going to continue here in moments. This is Free Talk Live.
So the protection of life, liberty, and property is what the Free State Project is all about. But it's an effort to move 20,000 people who understand.
It's about demonstrating to the entire country
that, we can have a free market, a truly free market.
Making it just a freer, great place to live.
It's the world's largest voluntarist libertarian community, and it's only getting bigger.
That's amazing, to be able to move to a place where other people like passionately believe in being free and independent.
What the Free State Project is managing to do, though, is to put their money where their mouth is. It's physically getting up across the country and saying, let's go someplace and let's demonstrate the power of these ideas. There's a lot of kind of philosophy that surrounds liberty. There's a lot of thinking about it and talking about it. But here in New Hampshire, people are doing it.
101 Reasons Liberty Lives in New Hampshire, a documentary by Free State Project Early Movers. Watch it free at 101reasonsfilm.com. 101reasonsfilm.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. There have been chaotic scenes in the U.S. House of Representatives, where for the first time in 100 years, a party's nominee has failed to be voted in as the Speaker of the House. Leader of the U.S. House Republicans, Kevin McCarthy, failed to secure the necessary votes in 2 rounds of voting, meaning more rounds will now need to take place. FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
The Republican leader wasn't able to secure a majority after hard-right lawmakers followed through on their threats to oppose him as Speaker. It's a serious blow for Kevin McCarthy and reveals the deep divisions within the Republican Party. He's vowed to continue forcing multiple votes if necessary. The House remains in limbo as no other business can occur without the election of a Speaker.
Disgraced former CEO of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, has pleaded not guilty in a New York federal court. He faces a myriad of charges, all related to his company's use of customers' funds for fraudulent activities. FSN's Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
In a short court appearance, Sam Bankman-Fried pleaded not guilty to all charges of fraud over the collapse of his bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX. Arriving cleanly shaved and dressed in a blue suit, Bankman-Fried was met by hordes of camera people and reporters outside the court. The former FTX CEO was extradited last month from the Bahamas, where he lived and where the crypto exchange was based. He was released on bond back in December and has had to wear an electronic monitoring device and was required to live with his parents. Already 2 of his close associates have pleaded guilty to fraud charges and have decided to cooperate with prosecutors. If found guilty, Bankman-Fried could spend more than 100 years behind bars.
24-year-old American football player Damar Hamlin remains in a critical condition in hospital after suffering a cardiac arrest during a game on Monday night. The Buffalo Bills player collapsed after making a tackle and was given CPR on the field. Tesla CEO Elon Musk has finally tapped a second-in-command. According to internal documents viewed by Reuters, that person is the electric car maker's China boss, Tom Zhu. FSN's Tony Waterman has more from Texas, where Tesla is headquartered.
According to Reuters, Tom Zhou has been promoted to take charge of Tesla's U.S. assembly plants as well as sales operations in North America and Europe. That makes him the highest-profile executive after CEO Elon Musk. Zhou joined Tesla in 2014 and is credited with turning things around at the electric car maker's Shanghai plant after months of COVID lockdowns, famously sleeping inside the factory as he worked to get production back on track. The promotion could also free Musk up to focus on other ventures like Twitter.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
You can stick it to the man and big tech. Join our FTL social mastodon at social.freetalklive.com.
It is Free Talk Live, and you can join the show here. The number is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. Free Talk Live is brought to you this hour by Bullion Max. BullionMax.com/FTL. That's where you can go and get your silver starter kit at employee pricing. You get that because you're a Free Talk Live listener. And maybe you're new to silver and gold. Some of the most stable assets in recorded history. Savvy investors have been diversifying into silver and gold for generations, and now you can too. Or maybe you're not so brand new and you're just looking for a new gold or silver option where you can buy a ton of variety. They've got that over for you at bullionmax.com/FTL. That's where you can get started and help protect yourself from the constant inflation of the Federal Reserve. We've been talking about Bitcoin here, which is, of course, another wonderful alternative. But gold and silver were doing the same thing for people for much, much longer, long before 2009. We're talking about, hundreds of years people have been protecting their wealth by getting into gold and silver. You can get 5 ounces of silver from the world's most popular mints, and they throw in a free gold bag. Just go to bullionmax.com/FTL. That's bullionmax.com/FTL. It's Ian, Aria, and Mark here joining you tonight. We've been talking about the 14th birthday of Bitcoin, which is today, according to news.bitcoin.com, that has a piece here kind of about, it gets a little bit too technical, so I'm not going to get into that part here where they talk about hash rates and things like that. We don't really need to know about all that, but they do say that it changed everything because it introduced the first working solution to the Byzantine generals problem.
Well, sort of. And I dispute the idea that Bitcoin actually contributed anything on this particular. No, Bitcoin contributed a lot. Don't get me wrong. However, the very existence of 51% attacks, the continued existence of 51% attacks, although they're prohibitively expensive on the Bitcoin blockchain, that's because of the value of Bitcoin and so on, it doesn't actually do anything to solve that particular problem. 51% attacks still exist. If you have 51% of people who are bad actors, it will still destroy the entire plan. Bitcoin didn't fix that problem. It just made it prohibitively expensive.
So I don't know enough about what the Byzantine generals problem is.
I wouldn't be able to explain it in the full way that it's set up, but it's got something to do like you're in ancient time, ancient Rome, ancient Byzantium, you're attacking a city. Your plan requires some percentage of your generals to either take a certain action at the same time or to not take an action at the certain time. If some of them are bad actors and they don't comply, it derails the entire plan. So you need to come up with a way for fault tolerance, essentially.
I've got it here. According to Medium.com, imagine divisions of a Byzantine army attacking a completely encircled city. To proceed, the generals of each division who are dispersed around the city's periphery must agree on a battle plan. However, while some generals want to attack, others may want to retreat. In the official description of the Byzantine generals' problem, there's a leader-follower setup. In order to achieve consensus, the commanding general and every lieutenant must agree on the same decision. The conditions are described as follows. The commanding general must send an order to his N-1 lieutenant generals such that 1. All loyal lieutenants obey the same order, and 2. If the commanding general is loyal, then every loyal lieutenant obeys the order he sends.
It gets really confusing, and the problem here is, the reason it gets confusing is because any one of those lieutenants could be a spy operating for the enemy city, and if they give one of those generals bad information, the entire plan fails.
To complicate matters, the generals are so far apart from each other that the messengers are required in order for the generals to communicate. Also, one or more lieutenants may be a traitor intending to sabotage the situation. So given these conditions and the commander-lieutenant setup, can the army execute a strategy? The solution to the problem relies on an algorithm that can guarantee that 1. All loyal lieutenants decide upon the same plan of action, and 2. The small number of traitors cannot cause the loyal lieutenants to adopt a bad plan. So
the 51% would be the disloyal lieutenants causing the blockchain to adopt the wrong plan.
But the odds that that can happen are very, very, very
low.
It's
prohibitively expensive. It's not going to happen. That's for sure. But it's because, and this is why Bitcoin initially imposed the block size limit of 1 megabyte, and then ultimately I think it got increased a little bit with that SegWit, and it all gets very, very complicated. However, the gist of it is that Satoshi Nakamoto knew this problem wasn't solved and that the Bitcoin blockchain needed some level of protection in order to prevent it, to safeguard it against 51% attacks.
The loyal lieutenants will all do what the algorithm says they should, but the traitors may do anything they wish. The algorithm must guarantee the first condition regardless of what the traitors do. The loyal lieutenants should not only reach an agreement, but should agree upon a reasonable plan. And so Satoshi Nakamoto somehow solved this problem. I presume that has to do with the fact that the blockchain is distributed and constantly being checked upon itself to make sure that there's no sneakiness going on with somebody trying to cook the books.
It's true that no one can slip in a false transaction into the Bitcoin blockchain. Like that aspect of it is true. But if enough of the lieutenants are disloyal, if enough of the miners are bad actors, then they can derail the entire blockchain.
Sure. Well, we understand that. I mean, that's what the 51% attack is.
Right.
The idea there is that 51% of the miners would be bad actors, and they would act to destroy the system, basically take it over, and essentially destroy the value of Bitcoin, which again would be insanely prohibitively expensive when it comes to the Bitcoin blockchain.
It's not practical
because they would need to spend billions upon billions of dollars in order to attain the mining equipment necessary. And attain the hash rate necessary in order to be able to. It just from a financial perspective, it's not even viable.
Right, because the cost of the ASICs and the miners and all of that equipment would go up, as well as the technological people who are setting it up. All of that would go up as the supply of their skills went lower because other people were buying it, and as the supply of ASICs went lower because more people were buying it.
Well, but even if you could acquire it all in one fell swoop, it would be prohibitively expensive to do so. And then you would just sink the value of the thing that that you wanted to.
I don't even think you would, because the rest of the world, in a very free market way, would just be like, okay, well, we're ignoring your blockchain now. We're continuing with this fork that isn't as corrupted as your blockchain.
But in theory, you could then move your miners to attack that fork. If you had that much mining power, you could destroy any blockchain in the world.
Good point.
And
the only organization that I think makes sense for that is an organization that can create money. They would have to be able to create money in order to, and then surreptitiously acquire enough ASICs. These are the special computers. What does ASIC stand for, Aria?
Application Specific Integrated Circuit, I believe.
I think so.
I thought you got. Yeah, yeah, that sounds right. And maybe it's computer at the end. Anyway, these ASICs, they would just turn them on all at once. It could be done, but like you said, prohibitively expensive. At this point, there's no organization that it makes sense to do this for. I can only come up with like the Federal Reserve, the United States government, the World Bank, whatever issues, the euro.
Well, and the fact
I don't
is,
think Russia could do it, and China would. It wouldn't be good for China's economy to do it, in my opinion.
Well, right, and that is that. Of course, a lot of people have been asking this question over the years: is what if indeed it's true that the Federal Reserve is threatened by Bitcoin? Why wouldn't they go through with the 51% attack?
See, that's what people don't understand. The Federal Reserve, the U.S. government, they cannot be overtly evil. If they act in a way that is overtly evil, if they go out to destroy in this immoral, fraudulent sort of sense with the 51% attack, this piece of technology, that destroys the faith of the public. The only reason this entire stupid system exists is because the average person is able to walk around the world believing that the U.S. government is a force for good in the world.
Well, but Bitcoin doesn't exactly have a force for good reputation at this point. I mean, we saw the jury in Ian's trial basically, I'm not so sure about this Bitcoin thing. The average person isn't sure.
That's because they believe the U.S. government is a force for good. U.S. government says this, therefore this.
Well, then that's what I'm saying. Is
that was exactly my point.
Could say, hey, we got the white hat. Bitcoin's got the black hat. And I would say that it was even true in the past, more so. Obviously, it hasn't been done in the past. It can only be done in the future. And I would think that in the near future, if an attack occurred, a 51% attack occurred on the Bitcoin network, that it would likely rally, win, and then the price would skyrocket because it would show that it could stand up to that. But you wouldn't want to do a 51% attack. You would want to do a 65% attack.
I see your point, though, and I hadn't really thought that through considerably. Like, if the U.S. government were to do it, then the average person would think that it was an action, it was a good and just action, simply because the U.S. government had undertaken it.
That's the idea, but I don't think that they could acquire, and I don't know if it's the U.S. government, I'm actually saying the Federal Reserve, could acquire enough ASICs to do the job. At this point, when, the Department of Education buys 100 shotguns, everybody's like, what's going on? So it would be difficult to, for the world not to know if, the Federal Reserve was surreptitiously buying up ASICs.
So another reason why they might not do this is because there are probably people within the Federal Reserve System who own Bitcoin, right? Like, there's probably some people that have seen the value of this, or at least have predicted that it may go up in value, and they have purchased it on their own personal recognition, and they don't want to see that fail, right? Like, they may still indeed believe in the Federal Reserve and the government and the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, or all of that, but on the back end, they probably don't tell their buddies that they've got themselves their own little Bitcoin collection. They don't want
we know
see
that
it go down.
That's true, because some people have left the Federal Reserve and come over to our side and started working within the Bitcoin world. As sort of regulator helpers and interfaces and that kind of thing. So I think you're right. I think Bitcoin's here to stay, but I'm just trying to come up with the only system I think that could bring it down at this point.
Well, according to Crypto51.app, this is a website that lists, allegedly, I mean, I presume it's accurate, lists the current hash rate, which is the amount of computing power that is being directed towards mining a specific proof of work cryptocurrency.
I can't imagine what it is at this point. I mean,
it's down from what it was.
I'm still like 2 years behind on this, right? But it's going to at least, I would guess 70 terahash.
No.
Oh, it's going to be the P one now.
Petahash. 261,951 petahashes. What that means, I don't know, but it does translate it into what they believe it would cost in dollars in order to attack the network for 1 hour of time. Because in order to do this 51% attack, you have to dominate the network for as long as you possibly can. And it's $691,972, so just under $700,000 for 1 hour of a 51% attack against the Bitcoin.
But it needs much more than 1 hour.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Well, and also remember that during a 51% attack, as I understand this, now if there's somebody out there that knows a little bit more about this than I do, because we've seen these things happen on smaller networks. Bitcoin SV, for instance, was attacked a couple of years ago, if I recall correctly. Before we got raided, I remember they were attacked. And basically what happens when 51% attack is going on is the word gets out. Hey, Bitcoin network's under attack. Don't transact. Because if you transact, if I were to try to send you, which we can't do, Arya, because we're on bail conditions, but if we weren't on bail conditions and we were allowed to use cryptocurrency, let's say we were trying to use, Litecoin or something like that, as something that's more attackable. Bitcoin Cash, for instance, says here Bitcoin Cash would cost about $3,300 an hour to run a 51% attack. Word gets out that says, hey, there's an attack going on, don't use it. If during that time frame I were to try to send you Bitcoin Cash, then the attackers could effectively redirect those coins to their own wallet, is what they could do. But they can't take coins out of your wallet. So as long as you don't authorize a transaction during the 51% attack, just because they quote-unquote own the network over 50% of the hash rate, that doesn't mean that they all of a sudden get your private key and can just reach in and take your Bitcoin.
Right.
So it really only affects the people who don't get the memo that there's a 51% attack going on. And that's going to be most people, right? Because, I mean, most people, most people don't know. But the fact is the word would get out, and that's one of the reasons why you need to keep on attacking, because you have to keep owning the network. So the longer
you would have to attack
it,
for an hour here, 1 week, and an hour the next week.
No, you want to keep it going. You want to if you want to destroy the network, then you want to make it unusable, right? That's going to destroy the value of Bitcoin. If you can dominate the network for a long enough time, people are going to go elsewhere. They're going to move and the price of Bitcoin's going to tumble.
I was thinking of if 10% of transactions were subject to a 51% attack because someone had that level of power over the Bitcoin network.
Just to do it randomly. I see
but
what
they
you're
did
saying.
it randomly. I would stop transacting. It's not worth the risk, right?
Let's go to the phones here. We got a gentleman on the line here. You're on Free Talk Live. What's your name?
Hey, it's Reverend Ratspeed.
Hey, Ratspeed. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to mention the Byzantine generals problem. I wanted to clarify something, and then I wanted to propose something for you to discuss. The Byzantine generals problem only handles an attack up to 51%. So Bitcoin actually does address it. If you have an attack that's over 51%, it's no longer a Byzantine generals problem. That's simply a a takeover of basically the majority. So
that's a fair point. I'll accept that.
And the other thing too is, I think we're kind of worried about the things that we shouldn't be worried about. I think the Byzantine generals problem has been completely, the network itself has been completely overtaken as of 2018 because of the whole SegWit thing. I thought it was very peculiar that back in the day when that quote-unquote soft fork was happening, and then all of a sudden the new Bitcoin retains the old name of Bitcoin when in fact that was the soft fork.
Are you going to have to, I'm a little bit lost here. Are you referring to when Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin had their schism back in 2017?
Correct. Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin. It's not a fork. That's what people were led to believe through the propaganda. Because once you change the code and inject something else that was not in the previous code, that
let's be fair. I mean, Bitcoin Cash has changed the code many times since it.
And it had changed before, though. I mean, there were many hard forks in Bitcoin's history prior to the one in 2018.
Correct, but all of the forks, in other words, whatever the majority was retains the name Bitcoin.
Right, which was still the case after 2018 when the majority still retained the name of Bitcoin. It just was SegWit.
Correct. So what my proposal is that once that happened, once SegWit and other extra stuff was put into the code, the Byzantine generals problem is null and void outside of that network. Just the same way that a virtual machine can be manipulated like a marionette by the strings of the host computer. In other words, you basically had a fish eat up another fish. You had, and what was the big fish that ate the smaller fish? It was the banking system.
Mm-hmm.
I think that
you're talking about how Bitcoin was sort of taken over quietly from the inside by big bankers who essentially paid the paychecks, because the programmers of Bitcoin never got paid by anybody up until 2016. And then they
remember.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if you remember, the people that were on the side of the soft fork into SegWit were the miners who stood to lose everything that they had invested in by getting all those really expensive hardcore GPU units, ASIC units, because if the scaling of the blockchain had progressed as Satoshi originally intended, which is what Bitcoin Cash stayed with, all they did was they started splitting it the way that it was supposed to, then they would have lost their profits. They didn't want to lose their profits. Therefore, the people who stood the most to lose put together a propaganda campaign to overtake the coin and make it what they wanted it to be. And
I don't know if I necessarily think the miners were responsible for that. And I'm building most of my history of Bitcoin off of the documentary Who Killed Bitcoin, and it made a pretty compelling case that it wasn't the miners who were pro-SegWit. It was the banking industry and these wealthy figures who had co-opted Bitcoin for their own purposes, whose names I can't remember, but they're affiliated with all sorts of groups, and it's like they're connected to this group, and these guys are connected to this group, and it comes back to the Council of Foreign Relations or whatever.
I think what Ratspeed is saying here is that the miners, maybe they didn't lead the charge, but ultimately they went in the direction of what they thought was financially beneficial for them, which was to get $5 fees on every transaction instead of 5-cent fees.
Exactly. If the banking industry is considered the mafia, then who's the mafia going to try to pay off the most to get them to go their way? The rich, powerful miners in the Bitcoin network.
Sure.
And then once that new code is injected into it, which was SegWit, suddenly the whole thing is, to use the expression from Britain, cocked up. It basically is completely null and void, and so the whole Byzantine generals problem, it really doesn't matter anymore. That's why I think it was so important for people to switch over to Bitcoin Cash at the very minimum when that soft fork happened.
Well, I mean, if the miners...
You can prove the miners didn't care about the principle of the matter. They just wanted to make money, because if they had cared about the principle, they would have moved over to Bitcoin Cash, and most of them didn't.
Yeah, and if you'll notice that most of the major political changes and shifts that happened in the Bitcoin realm happened after that soft fork. Before that soft fork happened, there really was no foothold in this entire Bitcoin mining operation or the currency. After 2018, that's when government started stepping in.
Why are you calling it a soft fork? I'm just curious.
That's what they called it. I think, personally, soft fork is just as much of a propaganda term as calling the government a government.
Well, the 2018 fork was, by all accounts, a hard fork, wasn't it?
Oh, no. Yeah. Well, okay, so according to all of the articles...
It was a chain fork, is what it was.
That's a hard
chain
fork.
Everyone was calling it a soft fork. You could look it up. So they were trying to make it seem like it was, don't worry, this is just a soft fork. You don't have to worry about things.
I know what he's talking about. He's saying that the fork, quote-unquote, fork for Bitcoin, BTC, into the new code that they were going to use was indeed a soft fork. It wasn't a hard fork. But
then the BCH fork was the hard fork.
But then what happened was there was a chain fork that happened, which is different from a coding. It's not really so much a coding standpoint. It was just that they went off in their own direction, and the BTC went in another direction, and so you had a chain split at that point. And for listeners that don't know what that means, it means that on the blockchain, from the very beginning, the blockchain is essentially a distributed ledger of all the transactions that have ever happened on a given cryptocurrency. So in the case of Bitcoin, starting January 3rd of 2009, their blockchain started, and then I think it was August 1st of 2017, if I recall correctly, was the day on which that schism happened, where there were then two copies of the Bitcoin blockchain that became into existence. One of them was Bitcoin Cash, the other was Bitcoin. But they all had the same transactions right up until the moment of that split on their chain, and then they started having different transactions from that point forward, and they've been competing ever since.
And my point in bringing all this up is I think it was unfair for Bitcoin Cash to be called Bitcoin Cash when that was the true Bitcoin, unchanged. Bitcoin plus SegWit became the fork, therefore they should have been forced to change their name, not the other way around.
Well, no one was forced to do anything. It was a matter of the market and how most people understood the thing.
Well,
you said yourself that the most popular one is the one that gets to maintain the name of Bitcoin.
Well, you say that the market decided this. Well, whomever decided to change their code and begin introducing SegWit into the code, yes, that was a market change. But what if those were the people that were being paid off?
Well, the guy who created GIF insists that it's supposed to be pronounced GIF, but you got a 99% of people out there and it's pronounced GIF.
Well,
but
look,
at that point, I mean, and there's no Byzantine problem for GIF. So,
Ratspeed, I get what you're saying, but the reality of it is most of the miners went with the original BTC blockchain, and then most of the exchanges out there were the ones that said, okay, well, the original BTC blockchain should still be
not Kraken. They
BTC.
called it XBT.
No, I think they've been doing that.
Oh, had they?
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for the call, Ratspeed. I do appreciate hearing from you. Hour number 2 is on the way. You can share your thoughts on Bitcoin's birthday.
There is no such thing as attention span, according to Jerry Seinfeld, who figures that people have an infinite attention span if you are entertaining them. Hey, he's kept us from channel surfing for several decades, and now he's making more millions as a Las Vegas headliner. With money and attention so scarce now, effective communication skills have never been more important, especially if you're looking for work. So choose every single word as though it was the last word the person you're speaking to will hear. Otherwise, it might be. Avoid redundancies such as added bonus, advance warning, end result, prior history, or personal belongings. And avoid cliches like the plague. Just kidding. For more tips, hit survivalspeech.com. I'm Holland Cook.
So you've signed the Shire Society Declaration and are planning your move to New Hampshire to be around more liberty-oriented people. Next, sign up for the Shire Society Forum at forum.shiresociety.com. There are a bunch of people there who are already in the Shire, and they want to meet you. If you're already in the Shire physically, you should also come by the forums. Remember, not everyone uses Facebook. New people are signing up for the Shire Society Forum every month, so drop in and say hello at forum.shiresociety.com. Tired of cancel culture? Sick of mega tech corporations holding an axe over your head? Join the LRN.FM Matrix chat server. It's self-hosted, so no one else can tell us what to do or say. Don't like the existing channels? You can make your own. You can even connect into some of our channels from other Matrix servers. It's federated. For the full LRN.FM Matrix experience, though, you should join our server via the step-by-step instructions at chat.lrn.fm. Chat.lrn.fm.
You're listening to the live edition of Free Talk Live. Hour number 2 is next after the news here on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. There have been chaotic scenes in the U.S. House of Representatives, where for the first time in 100 years, a party's nominee has failed to be voted in as the Speaker of the House. Leader of the U.S. House Republicans, Kevin McCarthy, failed to secure the necessary votes in 2 rounds of voting, meaning more rounds will now need to take place. FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
The Republican leader wasn't able to secure a majority after hard-right lawmakers followed through on their threats to oppose him as Speaker. It's a serious blow for Kevin McCarthy and reveals the deep divisions within the Republican Party. He's vowed to continue forcing multiple votes if necessary. The House remains in limbo as no other business can occur without the election of a Speaker.
Disgraced former CEO of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, has pleaded not guilty in a New York federal court. He faces a myriad of charges, all related to his company's use of customers' funds for fraudulent activities. FSN's Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
In a short court appearance, Sam Bankman-Fried pleaded not guilty to all charges of fraud over the collapse of his bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX. Arriving cleanly shaved and dressed in a blue suit, Bankman-Fried was met by hordes of camera people and reporters outside the court. The former FTX CEO was extradited last month from the Bahamas, where he lived and where the crypto exchange was based. He was released on bond back in December and has had to wear an electronic monitoring device and was required to live with his parents. Already 2 of his close associates have pleaded guilty to fraud charges and have decided to cooperate with prosecutors. If found guilty, Bankman-Fried could spend more than 100 years behind bars.
24-year-old American football player Damar Hamlin remains in a critical condition in hospital after suffering a cardiac arrest during a game on Monday night. The Buffalo Bills player collapsed after making a tackle and was given CPR on the field. Tesla CEO Elon Musk has finally tapped a second-in-command. According to internal documents viewed by Reuters, that person is the electric car maker's China boss, Tom Zhu. FSN's Tony Waterman has more from Texas, where Tesla is headquartered.
According to Reuters, Tom Zhou has been promoted to take charge of Tesla's U.S. assembly plants as well as sales operations in North America and Europe. That makes him the highest-profile executive after CEO Elon Musk. Zhou joined Tesla in 2014 and is credited with turning things around at the electric car maker Shanghai plant after months of COVID lockdowns, famously sleeping inside the factory as he worked to get production back on track. The promotion could also free Musk up to focus on other ventures, like Twitter.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks, looking in more depth at a violent start to the new year in Ukraine. Russia launched fresh drone and rocket strikes on the country on New Year's Eve itself. Meanwhile, hundreds of Russian soldiers are reported to have been killed when Ukrainian forces fired missiles at a Russian barracks in one of the war's deadliest single attacks. That action is being defended by Arseny Yatsenyuk, who served as Ukraine's prime minister from 2014 until 2016.
We don't know the exact number, but the Ukrainian military already reported that the suggested number of those who have been killed and wounded is around 600 Russian soldiers who illegitimately invaded Ukrainian territory. So I want once again to underline that this is a legitimate military target, and we will kill those Russians who want to kill us. What the hell they are doing on the Ukrainian soil? They have to go back to their home country and to go directly to Kremlin and to press on their president for everything that he has done against Ukraine and against his people. It would be counterproductive for Ukraine to decrease the counteroffensive that Ukrainian military already launched.
Russia confirmed that the attack on the barracks had taken place, but the Kremlin denied the scale of the death toll claimed by Kyiv. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And the main news again, there's been chaotic scenes in the US House of Representatives where for the first time in 100 years, a party's nominee has failed to be voted in as the Speaker of the House. The disgraced former CEO of the former cryptocurrency exchange FTX has pleaded not guilty to fraud charges in New York, and 24-year-old American football player Damar Hamlin remains in a critical condition after suffering a cardiac arrest during a game. There's more from us on Twitter at Feature Story. That's Feature Story News. Nick Harper reporting.
I'd like to tell you about our newest innovations in helping to keep our communities safe. Problem Creation Policing. Problem Creation Policing, or PCP, is a way to get the entire community involved in maintaining a safe neighborhood. This is more than just a neighborhood watch. We plan to have officers on the ground, helping, aiding, and surveilling for illicit activities. You never know when you're going to find some young punk doing something illegal out in public. That's why we're going to have officers everywhere. You never know when they're going to pop up. So we want PCP in our homes, at our jobs, and in our schools. We want PCP everywhere. How can you get involved in PCP? Well, for starters, you can call your local authorities and ask them how you can get PCP. I'm Byron Kingsley from the Citizens Respecting the Authority of Police.
Don't miss a moment of Free Talk Live. Get our archives daily via our podcast at feeds.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
It is Free Talk Live. You can join us here as we kick off the second hour of the program. The number is 603-283-6160. Bring up whatever is on your mind. Here tonight, it's Ian.
And Arya.
And Mark.
And we also have Mark out there as well. We've been talking about Bitcoin's birthday 14 years ago, January 3rd, 2009. Bitcoin was created. Bitcoin was released. I guess it was being created prior to that, but it was released to the public. Anyone who wanted to could download the software and begin mining Bitcoin, which at the time was worth absolutely nothing, but you'd get 50 Bitcoin. Every 10 minutes would go to the lucky miner that was able to mine the block into existence. And by the way, the Bitcoin continues to this day. It's roughly every 10 minutes that a new block, quote unquote, is mined. And what that means is that every transaction that has been entered, if you will, someone has said, I want to send somebody Bitcoin or whatever. They put a blockchain, they put an entry into the blockchain's what they call mempool. And then when the mining of the block happens, and all of those waiting transactions are then officially made permanent on the Bitcoin blockchain.
A portion of them.
At least a megabyte's worth of them.
Right.
So if there's too many transactions, then only the ones that are paying the most will get into that block, and the rest have to wait.
And this is why I can't get into the technical reasons for it, but this is why Bitcoin SV made one of the best decisions ever by removing the block size definition on the blockchain.
Right.
I wish that the other blockchains would do it.
Yeah, and we had Ratspeed on the line just a few moments ago who was advocating that Bitcoin Cash was the one true Bitcoin. And look, I am not a maximalist of any coin. I am someone who believes that as long as the coin works for the purposes of what it's supposed to do and it does it affordably, then I like it. Right, so I like that Bitcoin Cash works cheap. I like that Dash works cheap. Monero, I like that it's private, and Bitcoin SV also works cheap from what I understand. The problem, of course, is that Bitcoin SV was headed up. The Bitcoin SV problem is a personal problem. The Bitcoin SV problem isn't so much a technological issue. It's the guy that is its biggest proponent is what appears to be a total scumbag.
Yeah, he's a complete hack.
Yeah, and he sues everybody who says something about him, so I'm surprised we haven't gotten hit with a lawsuit yet, but we're probably just not large enough as far as influence. Our friend Roger Ver, of course, has been sued multiple times by, the gentleman's name is Craig Wright, and he loses time after time after time after bringing these fallacious, frivolous cases against people just for saying things that he doesn't like. And so the fact that they've got this guy sort of at the helm as their spokesman or whatever is what really has sunk Bitcoin SV as a viable competitor to Bitcoin. But the truth is, Bitcoin SV, if you want to go with what's the most like the original Bitcoin, it's Bitcoin SV. There's no doubt about it.
It is.
As far as the quote-unquote Bitcoin brothers or the Bitcoin options that are out there, because Bitcoin Cash has had upgrades.
So what Ratspeed was saying was that at the moment in time that Bitcoin Cash became Bitcoin Cash, that it had a better claim to his mind.
That's true.
Than Bitcoin did to the name Bitcoin, BTC. Bitcoin
Absolutely
BTC
true.
Did.
Yep, I totally agree with that.
I don't know. We didn't get a chance to talk to him, and I don't think it really particularly matters. It's much more of a how many angels and heads of pins and all this good sort of thing. Which one is most like Bitcoin? I don't know that matters. I think that what matters is what people want and what people like, and I wonder about the marketing tool of saying, for instance, ladies and gentlemen, the 2023 Model T Ford, right? Like, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even roll out a Model T Ford right now in America. There's so many of the CAFE standards and all these sorts of things. You'd be thrown in under the prison just for trying to sell a Model T Ford as a new car.
Well, and of course I'm being accused in the chat room of simping for Bitcoin SV, and nothing could be further from the truth. I am not a fan of Bitcoin SV. I think it's just an absolute dumpster fire of a cryptocurrency. I was just simply saying, from the perspective of somebody that wants the one that's quote-unquote true to the original Bitcoin, that's the one that is closest. But Mark, you make a great point. It's like, why is that valuable to people? Bitcoin's once every 10-minute block. I mean, every other cryptocurrency that has come out since then has been faster than that as far as its ability to confirm transactions.
Is it like coin every 5?
2.5.
Okay.
Yeah, they did
there's benefits.
If anybody wants to know which one makes my heart flutter just a little bit, the one that I'm truly in love with, the answer is Monero.
Oh, okay. Mark's a Monero man now. That's good.
I've been over here. I was curious because I know I've been, kicking this horse that is the blockchain block size definitions for a very long time. So I was curious when I first talked about the need to remove block size definitions from Bitcoin, and it was 5 years ago.
That was when you first talked about it. Yeah.
I can't find the full article. I just found sort of a mirror of it. But 5 years ago, the article is why we need to remove, why Bitcoin block size definitions must be removed.
And they haven't done a damn thing since that time.
It's killing the network.
Yeah, it's too bad.
It causes the individuals, the people out there trying to use Bitcoin to spend more money to compete with each other.
Right.
Instead of how it should work, which is the miners are competing with one another to claim our transactions, because the more transactions they claim, the more money they should make. They should be competing with each other, but they're not. They've cartelized.
Well, and this goes back to what Ratspeed he referenced, but we didn't get into in detail, was the fact that bankers started paying a company back in 2015, 2016, somewhere in that range, that what are they called? Blockstream. Blockstream. They started paying this company called Blockstream to then pay the key developers of Bitcoin a salary that's a great thing, right? Like, we're going to pay these guys. They're doing something good. Hey, But then they, of course, became owned by Blockstream, and the vision for that company, which was to keep Bitcoin slow and keep it small and keep it to where it's full. Keep it to where the network is constantly full of transactions, to where, as what you were saying, Aria, people are bidding up the price of the fees in order to get their transactions ahead of the rest of them. And we saw what happened in 2017, where fees were going up to $5, $6, $10 per transaction. It hasn't gone that high since that time, but it could. If Bitcoin ever became as popular, as if there was ever such a run on it as there was back in 2017, you would see those fees go up again. Maybe that'll never happen again.
We've seen transaction costs go as high as $100 now.
In 2017.
Well, it depends on how much data you're sending, right? If you're sending from 15 different, because you're using an HD wallet, I don't want to get into the technicals of what that is, but if you're basically sending from 15 different wallets to send half a Bitcoin because each one has 0.001 Bitcoin in it, that's going to cost you a lot more.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep, sure is. And I did talk to a Blockstream guy at one of the conventions. I think I can't remember which one it was, but I'm sure you were at it too, Ian. But we, somehow or another, I got sat at a table with him. And I tried to get an explanation out of him on the small blocker argument. Couldn't get one that made sense. So far, I have yet to hear a small blocker make an argument that I can understand as to why they want what they want. But I'd also like to point out that there's sin on the other side, too. There's sin on the big blocker side, which is to say that Bitcoin Foundation existed before Blockstream. They attempted to pay these developers something, but nobody could kind of come up with who should pay them, and nobody wanted to donate to do it. And the donation model didn't work in kind of the way it doesn't work with Free Talk Live, right? Like, when Blockstream came in and said, hey, don't worry, we'll pay them. We, the banks, maybe the CIA, we're not entirely sure who it is, but we'll pay them. Don't worry. That's it. And that's not the banks or the CIA's fault. That's the people who refused to pony up the money initially. That's their fault.
Well, I'm not going to blame people who didn't want to pay for something that they already were getting for free. I can understand why that is. I'm sure their perspective was, well, Bitcoin works fine.
If you live in a fantasy land where things are free, Ian, you're going to pay the consequences. If you're not paying, you're the product.
Well, the fact is, these programmers should have had some principles, instead of letting themselves be owned by some bankers for $50,000 a year or whatever.
Well, their principle was to make money, right? What's more libertarian than that?
But that wasn't the principle of Bitcoin. The principle of Bitcoin was to undermine the financial system and give the power of money back to the individual for the first time ever.
But the miners weren't interested.
We still aren't certain who Blockstream is. It's just conspiracy theory who Blockstream is.
No, it's not. They come right out on their website and tell you who their investors are.
Did they say that back in 2018 or whenever?
I'm pretty sure they did, yeah, because they had to do public funding rounds.
Well, I couldn't tell you, but what I can tell you
AXA Bank, Digital Currency Group, which is made up by MasterCard, among others. So those are two of the big ones.
Yeah, the FTC,
as far as I'm concerned, if you think that things are going to go along for free, you are living in a fantasy world. And if you live in a fantasy world, expect reality to come smack you in the face on the regular.
Well, nothing was free in here,
it was darn close to free.
Well, no, because...
The devs thought it was free because they weren't getting paid, Aria.
You paid the price. Well, developing something like this it's always going to be a labor of love, right? There's no organization to pay the Bitcoin developers for paying it.
Well, yeah, that's what he's bemoaning. He's bemoaning the fact that somebody tried to raise money for them apparently, and they didn't get enough, and so the bankers outbid them.
Yeah. I mean,
and now I don't understand what the. And to the winner goes the spoils, and there you are, Bitcoin of the spoils.
Yeah, it sucks, but I mean that's the way it happened.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, but there's no guarantee that even if people had ponied up money, that these people wouldn't have been outbid by the bankers. I mean,
I'm saying that if you don't learn the lessons that life teaches you, and this is a lesson, and there is a lesson to learn from it, then you are doomed to repeat it. And what you're saying is, but why the poor people, and why couldn't the developers? Why didn't the developers work for free? Well, I'll tell you why they didn't work for free, because that's not what we call work.
Well, you don't understand free software, Mark. There's developers all over the planet that work for free to develop software. Linux, of course, is a great example of it.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
I mean, there's a ton of people that have done this. Now, they have ways of monetizing, for instance. So, for instance, with Linux or with like Ubuntu, you don't have to pay for the software. But if you want to get somebody to give you a tutorial, if you want to have them, walk you through how you use the software, you got to pay for that, right? Like, so there's some paid support that you can do. And in the case of Bitcoin, the developers were doing it ostensibly because they thought it was a good idea, but the idea that they couldn't somehow monetize that, hello, you're a developer, you can mine Bitcoin just like the rest of people can, and then you work on the software to make it better, to make sure that your investment works out in the long run. I mean, it had its incentives.
By 2018, mining wasn't a viable way for developers to make money. Now, if they had been in for a long time and they had, had the foresight to do such a thing, but let's remember that Andreas Antonopoulos, one of the early voices of Bitcoin, his claim was he didn't really have any Bitcoin. When, I don't remember when this was, like 2017 or something like that. He's like, when asked how much Bitcoin does he have, he's like, I really don't have any. I've always just kind of gone around and spent it and used it and talked about it, but I never held on to it. The foresight that some have had isn't the same as the foresight of others. And I would say that I am very familiar in working in projects for free. Free Talk Live exists in part because you and I chose to work on it for free for a number of years. And right now I'd say, hey, what am I getting paid for tonight? And the answer is nothing, because I'm here working on a labor of love for free.
Well, right. Activism tends to not be very financially rewarding. And that's just the reality of it. I get what you're saying. You're bemoaning the fact that not enough people ponied up to essentially pay these developers, and so they were easily able to be snatched up by the banks.
I'm not just bemoaning that. I'm bemoaning that humans continue to do such a thing. Like, they keep on expecting things to just exist for free. Look at the newspapers online dying because, and journalism is dying because people won't pay for what they want to consume in the form of news.
Because we live in a world where we don't have to pay for this stuff anymore.
Why would someone want to pay for the New York Times?
I don't know about the New York Times, but I'm going to tell you that journalism, people still want to consume that. They still want to read news stories, but they want to read them for free.
Well, now you can go to, Substack, and you can subscribe to Edward Snowden, or you can subscribe to Glenn Greenwald, and you can get their news, their opinion, or whatever directly from them, which you can read for free, but it does hit you with the opportunity to subscribe. I suspect a very small percentage
that model works.
I don't know if it does. I suspect a small percentage of people will subscribe, just like in the same way a small percentage of our listeners subscribe to the Free Talk Live AMPS program. But the reality is, I mean, there's so much competition out there these days that the people who used to make good money doing journalism, they're going to have to work a lot harder, and they're not going to make as much money.
Works or doesn't work is kind of irrelevant at this point. The fact of the matter is that that's the game that's in town. That's what you got to do. That's the way you can make any money whatsoever.
If you want to stay in journalism, if you want to stay in, entertainment,
maybe it's only $10 an article versus the $5,000 an article you were making 2 years ago, but it's the only way. I mean, the alternative is to run clickbait ads and stuff like that on your website, and that's
crap.
That's not going to bring you anything either.
Well, the clickbait ads supposedly bring quite a bit of revenue, but I don't know the answer.
Seems to be drying up as far as I can tell.
Then maybe I'm not paying that much attention to these things anymore. But what I can say is that the consumer, I think that the consumer is to blame in part too. Not just as a journalist, at some point or another, you're going to get tired of chasing smaller and smaller, payouts. And you're going to be like, you know what? I can go work someplace else.
Go work at
McDonald's.
McDonald's.
I can do something else. Well, I doubt McDonald's is going to be their choice, Ian.
At least until you get replaced by an automation system. They now have McDonald's. There's a test market in, I think, Fort Worth, Texas, where they've rolled out completely automated drive-through technology.
What happens when the supply of journalists go down, Mark? Because they're like, screw this, I'm not making enough money, I'm going to go get a different career doing something else. What happens to the rest of the journalists?
Then their spaces will be filled by people who are willing to do the work for quote-unquote free. And what that means is that you will no longer have quote-unquote unbiased journalism.
You don't have that
You'll
now.
have people. I don't know that we ever
Mic
did.
drop.
But
yeah.
I don't think anybody's won this. What I'm trying to tell you is, what I'm just trying to say is that, hey, look, there ain't nothing for free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. There's no free news. There's no free nothing.
No, but the fact is, competition drives prices down.
Mark is coming at this from such an old media perspective. It's like he didn't listen to last night's show at all.
But he did listen, based on what he was saying. The fact is, there's more competition now than ever before. And that's the point that I made in my email this week to the radio industry, explaining why we've dropped 72% of our commercial inventory from at least our online feeds, and radio stations now have 2 fewer breaks an hour, explaining to them that, look, radio used to be sitting pretty. It used to be 30 years ago, if you were in radio, your only competition, at least as far as audio entertainment was concerned, was the station across town or the stations across town. And that was it.
I mean, now we're competing with Tim Pool, and I guarantee you he's not going to commercial break even once an hour.
Yeah, I've never watched the guy's show.
I don't either,
I've only seen
he may
clips.
be going to commercials.
Doesn't he use YouTube ads?
I have no idea.
Well, he's one of those shows that's so popular, he just keeps getting donations all night. Like, there's people just throwing money at this guy, just because he's so popular. So that's one of the, so they're connecting directly with their viewers and with their listeners. But the point I was making to the radio stations is, radio used to be sitting pretty. We had no competition, and then all of a sudden in the year 2000 or thereabouts, online streaming started to become a thing. It wasn't really much competition, but it was there. And then 5 years later, at 2005, podcasts became a thing where you could then automatically deliver an MP3 file to listeners that wanted to receive it without any kind of clicking having to happen. They just woke up in the morning and there it was on their MP3 player. And that's become much more popular in the last 15 or so years. And then you add the smart speakers that came out within the last decade. You add into that satellite radio, of course, which is another competitor. And there's so many other listening options now for the average person. Radio cannot keep going about doing things the way they've done things forever. And that's true for everybody. It's true for journalism now as well. There used to be the newspaper. It was rare that newspapers even had a second paper, but some places, some bigger markets had a second daily paper. Now you can't find that.
Let's talk about Howard Stern for a second.
Well, before we do that, let's carry on with Ian's point just a tad bit further. Your point about people wanting stuff for free, because it may be the consumer's fault. I don't know, but when I listen to content, when I listen to a show or a podcast or watch a video, it is free. It damn well better stay free. And if it's not, I'm going to go find one that is. And if I really like the content, I will subscribe to them via Patreon or something like that. Because I am subscribed to a couple of websites and creators with Patreon. Mm-hmm. But if a single one of them ever says, you have to pay $1 to listen to this podcast, I'm out.
Patreon offers free things to people get things early. They'll get special content, Patreon content, and a variety of things. There's ways to do that. So they could very well be releasing content, a podcast, for instance, that you've got to pay to get. However,
right, but that's not quite what I meant. But you are correct.
What I mean is that people like Howard Stern, maybe Rush Limbaugh, who's not, of course, dead, a variety of content producers can say, you know what, I need to get paid the way I need to get paid. And if you want to listen to Howard Stern, you're going to have to do it in a small variety of ways, among them being the Sirius XM channel.
That's pretty sure that's the only way you can do it.
Is it? I don't know.
That's why they pay him, what they pay him, because
and they pay him
exclusive.
A tremendous amount. And if they they weren't getting subscribers, they wouldn't be able to pay him. So,
are they still getting subscribers?
They're still getting subscribers. How does Joe Rogan get paid what he gets paid when his isn't his free?
Spotify pays him.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, Spotify puts ads into his show, I would presume. The same way that they did with us when we were.
But he's not behind a paywall.
Well, Spotify has said Joe Rogan is valuable enough that we will pay him and put ads in.
He's not behind a paywall if you subscribe to Spotify. Like, I could go listen to a show and not be starting the ads because I have a premium Spotify account.
But can you subscribe to him without subscribing to Spotify?
Yes, but then you'll get the ads.
Got it. But still,
Spotify
he's not behind a paywall.
as a platform. And, they think that Joe Rogan's valuable enough it'll forward hit their platform.
The number here, if you want to join us, 603-283-6160. You can bring up whatever's on your mind, whether it's automation, the increase in choices in the market, driving prices down, or whatever is on your mind here tonight on Free Talk Live. More coming up.
Free Talk Live.
Some people actually need laws to know what the hell they're doing.
I don't think that's true. No, I have to disagree with you. There's only one law that people need to know, and that is do no harm. As long as you aren't hurting other people or stealing their stuff or damaging their property, then you are being law-abiding, because that's the one great natural law as far as I'm concerned. That's what, in fact, when they say, well, they love to say this in court, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, that phrase came about when that was the law, when that was pretty much the only concept you had to get, was that you don't hurt other people. Get it? Ignorance of that law, there's no excuse to ignore that law. That makes sense. But to say that ignorance of all these tomes and tomes and tomes of legislation that we have out there, that there's no excuse for that, of course there's an excuse.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
From Feature Story News in San Francisco, I'm Ira Spitzer. The Republican leader of the U.S. House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, has failed to secure the necessary votes to become Speaker of the House. It's the first time in the past century that a majority party's nominee has faltered on an initial ballot. FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
The Republican leader wasn't able to secure a majority after hard-right lawmakers followed through on their threats to oppose him as Speaker. It's a serious blow for Kevin McCarthy and reveals the deep divisions within the Republican Party. He's vowed to continue forcing multiple votes if necessary. The House remains in limbo as no other business can occur without the election of a Speaker. Kate Fisher, Washington.
The man suspected of killing 4 university students has waived his extradition rights, voluntarily agreeing to return to Idaho to face murder charges. Brian Kohberger, a graduate student studying criminology not far from where the fatal stabbings took place, was arrested at his parents' house in Pennsylvania last week. FSN's Tony Waterman has more.
Kohberger arrived at the courthouse handcuffed in an orange jumpsuit and escorted by armed officers. When asked by the judge if mental illness would affect his decision, he answered no. The district attorney in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, where Tuesday's hearing took place, said he expected Kohberger to be immediately extradited to Idaho. The 28-year-old PhD student is the primary suspect in the fatal stabbings of 4 University of Idaho undergrads in November. It's still unclear what connection Kohberger may have had with the victims or a possible motive. Kohberger's attorney says his client is shocked by the allegations. Tony Waterman, Texas.
Disgraced former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried has pleaded not guilty in a New York federal court. He faces a myriad of charges, all related to his company's use of customers' funds for fraudulent activities. FSN's Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
In a short court appearance, Sam Bankman-Fried pleaded not guilty to all charges of fraud over the collapse of his bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX. Arriving cleanly shaved and dressed in a blue suit, Bankman-Fried was met by hordes of camera people and reporters outside the court. The former FTX CEO was extradited last month from the Bahamas, where he lived and where the crypto exchange was based. He was released on bond back in December and has had to wear an electronic monitoring device and was required to live with his parents. Already, 2 of his close associates have pleaded guilty to fraud charges and have decided to cooperate with prosecutors. If found guilty, Bankman-Fried could spend more than 100 years behind bars.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this.
We're still not sure why you'd want to watch, but our video feed is streaming nightly for free at cam.freetalklive.com.
It's Free Talk Live. The phones are open here if you want to join the show. The number is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. Ian, Aria, Mark joining you tonight. And you can join us online anytime you want. Want to say thank you to Thomas Knapp, who is a Free Talk Live supporter of our AMPS program. You can join AMPS and join Thomas over there at amps.freetalklive.com. That's amps.freetalklive.com. That stands for Advertise, Market, Promote, and Support. This is a way for you to directly support what we do, which is becoming more and more important. I mean, we saw the vision for this in 2005 when we launched AMP. That's how long this has been around now. It's been around for more than 17 years, helping support Free Talk Live directly, helping us get the word out to other radio stations, because even though radio is certainly, doesn't have the influence that it used to, it still has a lot of incumbency. There's still a lot of stations, a lot of people listening on a regular basis. We are seeing the numbers go down over time as we're seeing other listening methods. And when I say we, I mean the industry, just right. Generally, when they do studies and they look at, well, how do you listen to your audio entertainment? There's a lot more people these days that listen to podcasts than ever before. So we know the competition's out there. Of course, we do have our own podcast. But if you want to connect directly with us, then the AMPS program is the way to do that. And thank you, Thomas, for stepping up. It's $5 a month. That's all we're asking for. And it's amps.freetalklive.com. That is where you can go to sign up for that and get some of the perks that we have access to, like the AMP Only podcast, which has our full radio show without any of the recorded commercials. Let's go to Phil in California. Phil, you're on Free Talk Live. Go ahead.
Okay, first of all, I want to say I'm not that weirdo who called up yesterday, but I did want to talk about Elon Musk. I don't know what to think of this, but he's putting out all these tweets. He's got a Venn diagram with 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451, and then his one tweet that caught my eye here was, it says, U.S. government agency demanded suspension of 250,000 accounts, including journalists and Canadian officials.
Wow.
So I just want, if he's putting out all this stuff, I mean, where's he coming from? I don't know what to think of this guy. Well, what do you guys?
Well, we've been covering a lot of it here. I did see he released something fresh today, and I didn't take the time to look at this particular one. It just seemed more sort of in the same theme of the old Twitter would do whatever the government asked without a warrant. The feds would just send emails to Twitter and say, ban these accounts, XYZ, do this, jump through these hoops, and Twitter would say how high, and then they would jump through the hoops. And so it's been example after example after. It's been exhaustive in the last few months. I figured the Twitter files was going to be like, a few and done. And it just keeps on coming. So, I mean, I think he's doing the world a real favor of showing exactly how hand in hand, how linked together at the hips and the elbows and the heads that the federal government and this social media company, and it's true in Facebook too, how truly linked they are.
He has stopped just short of saying, hey guys, you've been wondering how Twitter was managing to stay afloat while operating at a loss and not making any money? Well... here's the government.
They did say they were getting payments, like millions of dollars in payments. That was one of them. That was
right.
One of them.
It's basically exactly what happened to Bitcoin, what we just discussed in the last segment, the segment before last, where essentially people didn't want to pony up the money to support a platform that they used and enjoyed, and then turns out the government came in and took it over.
It's always the consumer's fault, to Mark.
I'm just saying, if you don't pay for something, you don't
that doesn't guarantee you anything. You could have paid Twitter $5 a month. They had a payment system. It could have been a bunch of money rolling to Twitter, and then the government comes in with $5 million more, and they're like, sure, we'll take that too. And
or some spoiled white billionaire comes in with $40 billion.
Sell out all of their users. They have no loyalty to them. They're going to do what they're going to do. Anyway, Phil, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the big thing is, like, I mean, it kind of gives credence to, the whole conspiracy theory, how Facebook started off as a government operation.
Yeah.
What is it, LifeLock or whatever? And it gives more credence to it. Makes me wonder, because I used to laugh, that kind of stuff, because if you remember when Facebook started, it used to be just for high school and college kids. I don't know.
Yeah, but we grew up. No, I mean, seriously. And now high school and college kids won't go anywhere near it. It was for people who were age 18 to 25, and now those people are age 30 to 40.
Yeah, and I mean, young people don't use it. They're on the TikTok's probably just, the algorithm, like all this stuff that all the conservatives talk about. It's legitimate. I do enjoy some conservative talk radio, even though it's just not my range. But I like Matt Walsh or whatever and that stuff.
That guy has a talk show?
He has a talk show. It's a daily hour he has. I think he does. It's a podcast of his videos he puts out on YouTube, I believe.
Gotcha.
It's definitely I enjoy some of the stuff he puts out, but it's kind of good getting a wide variety of where everyone's coming from.
Yeah, that's always good to keep your horizons out there and receive different opinions. Phil, thanks for the call, man. I appreciate you calling in here tonight and sharing that with us. The Twitter files are continuing. I don't think they've even gotten into the COVID thing. Musk said they've got Twitter files COVID edition coming in early 2023.
I'm not at all surprised to hear that. I saw an article today. I don't care about sports, but this one caught my eye for whatever reason. This 24-year-old professional NFL football player
that had a heart attack or
cardiac arrest.
Did he die
in the middle of a play? No, he is at the hospital. But
was he vaccinated?
The article didn't say, but we know he was. With all of the restrictions the NFL put on people, he was absolutely vaccinated. I'm not saying that caused him to go into cardiac arrest, but I'm saying 24-year-old professional athletes.
You don't normally hear about 24-year-olds having cardiac arrest issues,
especially not professional athletes. I'll give you the 300-pound 24-year-old having a cardiac issue. Sure. 300 pounds.
Okay, yeah.
But the 24-year-old professional athlete,
that's a good point.
Probably not.
Mark, your thoughts on Twitter files? Anything you want to share on that?
Well, I found Elon Musk to be very interesting since he's acquired Twitter, and again, some of these people out there I like because of the people that they piss off, as opposed to liking them for who they are. I'm still waiting to decide whether or not I think that Elon Musk is some kind of savior, but
he's not. He's got his own
I
problems.
tend to think not.
But for what he's doing, I appreciate. I mean, I can see the good that he's doing, for sure, at least in this case. I don't know if he's doing good every time he's doing things. Like, Neuralink looks a little suspicious.
He seems to me just like an edgelord. I mean,
with a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, everything that I've ever seen from Elon Musk nothing I've seen conflicts with that description of him. He's just trying to be as edgy as possible.
I appreciate
maybe
the work
some
he's
of it's
doing
sincere,
right now.
Maybe it isn't, but I don't know that he's got a principled bone in his body. He just, what's going to trigger the libtards, right?
That could be a principle.
I guess. And Musk doesn't necessarily come at it from a point of view of, I want to trigger the liberals or whatever, but he's not far from that.
I mean, he spent $44 billion on buying a website that was hemorrhaging cash in order to apparently trigger the libtards. So,
okay, fair point.
There's some principle there. Let's go to Crichton on the line in Kentucky. Crichton, you're on Free Talk Live.
Hi. I actually wanted to call in tonight because Bonnie mentioned the other day, she was talking about homeschooling. And I and my wife, mostly my wife, homeschooled 5.
Okay.
And
wow.
And I can say with certainty that it's a mixed bag. There is, as part of the problem that my wife has been going through lately, is because the 3 youngest of our children were adopted former wardens of the state. And in the state of Kentucky, on paper and in the state constitution, the right of the parent to educate their children as you see fit is guaranteed.
Okay.
But in practice, if I could get them to admit in court that homeschooling a former ward of the state is the root of the problem, I would win immediately.
The root of what problem?
I told you my wife was facing charges, and now we're still dealing with the state.
I did not remember that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. What were the charges about?
I can't tell you what the charges were.
Oh,
okay.
But they were BS. They
Hmm.
were nonsense. And if I could get them to admit in court, it's about the fact that the state does not like homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
I would win immediately.
Mm.
But they're not dumb enough to admit it in court.
Sure.
And that is my wife's biggest problem with the idea of moving to New Hampshire, is that, yes, all the things that look good, all the laws look good, but what is the secret policy of state child protective services? That is the problem.
Got to be better than what's going on in Kentucky.
You mean what is their policy in regards to homeschoolers?
Yeah, what is the real policy? What really happens when you go up against the state? When you get sideways with state?
Well, I think the better question is, will homeschooling your kids be enough to get you sideways with the state? In New Hampshire, that answer seems to be no.
I mean, there's a huge homeschooling movement here in New Hampshire that whenever there's any kind of bill in the state house that threatens homeschool rights, if you will, in any way, shape, or form, basically the homeschoolers make a field day or field trip out of that, and they all come out, they bring all their kids to the state house, and they all pile into whatever the hearing is on this particular bill, and they just overwhelm that particular committee with their numbers and their influence, and it never goes anywhere.
That has happened here for the past 20 years, too.
Yeah.
The Homeschool Legal
Crichton,
Defense Association. I'm sorry.
I'm curious, Crichton, what happens if, so it's wards of the state. I wonder what happens if you just pick up and move from the state that they were formerly wards of to another state. I would think the new state probably doesn't feel the sort of level of ownership that the previous one did.
And that would have been wonderful if I could have done that before this went down.
Yeah, and and then I would be curious what would happen to their case if you just happened to move out of the state. They didn't take the kids away from you, right?
Yes, they did.
God,
very sorry to hear that.
Did they take all of your kids or just the former wards?
Just the former wards?
The natural born kids are all adults.
Okay.
It was all the former wards.
And I'm sure that you love them too. So what I would say regarding New Hampshire is that New Hampshire has its hands full when it comes to homeschoolers, but it's still after anybody who wants to raise their kids on their own in a particularly sovereign fashion. So, for instance, Jay, who was a former co-host here on Free Talk Live, is having problems over what appears to be nothing. They just, somebody said that there's kids there running around, and off the cops come to the house. So all these things happen.
I think somebody
inside of the United States.
I mean, I'm not defending what this person was alleging or anything like that, but the allegation had to do with something with leaving a kid in a car or whatever, and I think they should be allowed to do that. And I don't know all the details, but that's supposedly what set DCYF on them in the first place.
As I said, doing things that would have been fine when I was a kid,
sure.
They're always a problem.
Yeah.
You're going to have these problems in the United States because the United States just is scared to death of raising kids.
Well, as I understand it in New Hampshire, and you really ought to talk to some people here who are in the homeschool movement, Crichton, because they would be able to tell you for sure on this. But my understanding is that if the state doesn't know you have kids, then they don't know you have kids, and they don't know you're homeschooling or whatever. And so if you've never had them registered in the government schools, then they don't know you have the kids. You see what I'm saying? So like if you had kids in the government school in New Hampshire and then you said, we're going to homeschool, then you'd sort of be on the list of people who are homeschooling. But if you just move into New Hampshire and you're homeschooling your kids, then that's it.
That's a really good point. And it wouldn't affect your kids at all, going into adulthood or anything like that, because I've never in my life been asked for my GED or my high school diploma or even my college degree.
Sure. So that's something to consider.
There's another topic I was tempted to touch on.
Okay.
About Mark commenting that he never got an explanation as to why there is a 1 megabyte limit on the size of a block in a blockchain.
Okay.
He never got it from a
the
Bitcoin programmer specifically. I believe he was asking someone at a convention.
No. I mean, what I considered a cogent argument for the small block, and I never really understood it. Yeah. Other than
Satoshi put forward such an argument way back in the day when he introduced it, and the argument was to help prevent 51% attacks.
Right, to prevent 51% attacks by having more hubs.
I thought it was to prevent spam on the blockchain.
Maybe that was it.
Yeah, I don't think it was 51% attacks.
I can answer this question.
Go ahead.
The answer to the question is that the market mechanism is designed to become expensive on purpose to force the development of side chains and parallel payment processing networks.
Well, that's certainly a theory.
That wasn't what Satoshi had foreseen, as I understand.
That wasn't what Satoshi argued either.
Not in his white paper, but I actually spoke to the man on email.
Oh, really?
On the original Bitcoin instance.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is part of the point. I've talked to these people in the past. It's a market mechanism. It is designed to force the development of parallel payment systems.
But that wasn't what Satoshi said, was it? That's what they're saying.
Yes.
Satoshi told you this?
Yes.
Okay.
Or whoever had the Satoshi handle in the original Bitcoin.org instance before it was wiped out and replaced. This was
what was that
12
forum?
Years ago. The original Bitcoin. Oh, BitcoinTalk.org.
Okay.
That was the name of it. The original one.
It's just a little test. I want to see if you knew the actual name of the forum, and you did. So that gives you credibility.
12 years, 13 years ago now.
Yeah. That's interesting because originally my understanding was Bitcoin had no limit initially when Satoshi first released it. Then Satoshi implemented the block restriction because of quote unquote spam, and I'm not really sure what that meant.
I didn't remember the
Spam
exact
transactions.
reason.
But I believe that the intention was to raise that over time. Now you're saying, Crichton, that your understanding from an actual conversation with Satoshi is that he did not intend to raise the block size?
It's not that he didn't intend to raise the block size, but he wanted a limit, a rational limit on the block size to force the market to develop these alternative payment systems.
Can you provide the proof for that? Because that's an interesting claim.
No, because that original instance has ceased to exist.
All right.
I couldn't prove it.
Okay. Crichton, thank you for the call tonight. I appreciate it. Let's continue here. Joe in Maryland, you're on Free Talk Live. Go ahead, Joe.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Hope you're doing well.
What's on your mind tonight? Go ahead.
Okay. The guy you were trying to think of earlier was Paul LaBelle, the criminal who got caught in Brazil.
Oh, the supposed alleged possible Satoshi. What was his name? Paul what?
Paul LaBelle.
LaBelle. Okay.
I think that's the guy.
Yeah, it is the guy. He was a real strange dude because I saw a documentary on him and stuff like that. He's got the only code that's other than Toshi's that's never been cracked. They still haven't cracked his computer.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about him. I remember reading something about the allegations behind why he could be Satoshi, and I remember it being pretty persuasive. I just don't remember any of the details.
It certainly wasn't. I think I was on the same.
He's a brilliant mathematician.
Yeah. I wasn't persuaded to the point where I'm like, yes, this guy is Satoshi. I'm like, if I had to place a bet on someone being Satoshi, that's who I would place my bet on.
Well, one thing's for sure, if Satoshi is not dead, and there's a good chance that he or she has passed away at this point, but if Satoshi is not dead, they would be a fool to reveal themselves at some point in the future, because all of the weight of the government, all of the weight of the state, the governments of the world that hate Bitcoin would come right down on that person's head.
Exactly.
Well, that was sort of proved with Craig Wright. I mean, once he said I'm Satoshi, then the Australian government just went after him and went after him and went after him.
Yeah, they did.
Well, isn't Craig Wright Australian, though, and a liar?
Well, yeah, but they still went after him.
For what?
Because he said he was Satoshi. So they were like, oh, it's him.
For what did they go after him for? I mean, did they...
Taxes.
Taxes.
Immediately, they went after him.
Well, that's Craig Wright's fault for being an idiot, I would suggest.
Right.
And, if Satoshi Nakamoto revealed himself, and, the Australian government or whatever government said, all right, fine, but you owe us 35% in taxes. Fine, if you'll accept it in Bitcoin.
All I'm saying is that if you claim to be Satoshi Nakamoto, reveal yourself to be Satoshi Nakamoto, allow yourself to be revealed as Satoshi Nakamoto, expect problems.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Joe, anything else you want to share?
Yeah. Also, you were talking about the Byzantine generals and the lieutenants. Everybody had to, be in coordination with each other and stuff like that. In World War II, in France, when they had the Maginot Line, Hitler could have been stopped. This one general, I can't remember their names, but this one general asked for reinforcements when Hitler was invading. And he had 140,000 troops that he could have reinforced the other general with and, stopped, hold off Hitler and stuff, stop him even. And because he didn't like him, he didn't send the troops to help him.
He didn't like the other general, you're saying?
Yep. That's a historical fact and everything like that. I kind of thought I thought that guy should have been shot for treason.
It all comes down to someone being petty, doesn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Was he French or Belgian?
French.
Okay. But I thought the Nazis went around the Maginot Line through Belgium in order to take...
They went through Belgium, but they still faced the Maginot Line. They had to get they had to break through the line before they hit the river, or it would have ended up in trench warfare again, like World War I.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe, for the call tonight.
Very interesting.
Definitely appreciate it. The number here is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. Speaking of warfare, Zelensky and Ukraine are in the news again. And this is a bit of a follow-up on a story that we did earlier. I think it was this year. I think it was RT that had an in-depth report on this as something that was likely going to transpire. And now even the mainstream media in the form of the New York Times is picking up the story where Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine has now signed off on legislation that is significantly expanding the government's regulatory power over the news media. You know, that whole pro-democracy, pro-freedom, everybody loves freedom in Ukraine, that government that we're all supposed to buy into is this freedom-loving thing.
Isn't it amazing how people just automatically side with the Ukrainian government? Just because they're not Russia, knowing absolutely nothing about them, no matter what facts you reveal about the Ukrainian government, like the fact that they have an entire battalion of Nazis and they, unleash child rapists into their military in order to get them out of prison. And then you have this on top of it. Zelensky, this is not the first time he's done something that was just horrifically anti-freedom. He dissolved the opposition party.
He did.
So his own political party, it would be like Joe Biden saying the Republicans, you can no longer exist, and having the FBI or whoever go out there and kick in the door.
Capture them.
Yeah. Say, oh, no, there are no more Republicans. Everyone's a Democrat now. Zelensky did this in Ukraine.
Yep. And now, according to the New York Times reporting on this, the media regulation bill expands the authority of Ukraine's state broadcasting regulator. They call them, so this is their equivalent of the FCC, okay? But they call it over there the National Council of Television and Radio Broadcasting, to cover online and print news media. It gives the regulator the power to fine media outlets, revoke licenses, and temporarily block certain online media outlets without a court order, and request that social media platforms and search giants like Google remove content that violates the law, according to the Ukrainian news media. So imagine if the FCC had jurisdiction over your websites, over your favorite websites.
And they didn't have to go to the courts anymore on top of that.
Well, the FCC can't go through the courts anyway, but yeah, what they're saying here is they could go through the court, or rather avoid going through the courts, to block certain online media outlets.
Right, so just with the flick of a pen, Zelensky could say, No more RT. No more Free Talk Live.
Total power over internet information. And this is supposed to be a government worth supporting? A government that cares about freedom? It's ridiculous. And even the New York Times can't avoid reporting on this now. There's more coming up here in moments. Hour 3's on the way on Free Talk Live.
Hey, you are going to love the movie Victimless Crime Spree. It's hilarious, heartwarming, and carries a ton of inspiring freedom messages. Feeling down about the lack of liberty in your life? You need to put on this film with some friends and have a good laugh. It's a true story about me and my friends in New Hampshire living free, singing, dancing, and getting arrested. Of course, it's all on video, and the bad guys, the cops, judges, bailiffs, and sheriffs, they all play their part like it's out of a movie or something. You would think we scripted the whole thing, but it's real life. Go ahead and have a watch, and if it's been a while, have another look. I guarantee you'll notice things now that you didn't notice before. And the best part is that you're going to walk away feeling a renewed sense of your own power. You are the master of your destiny, and you will be free in your lifetime. Victimless Crime Spree.
The new 4th edition of Healing Our World, The Compassion of Libertarianism, will take your understanding of liberty to a deeper level and has over 1,300 updated references, new cartoons, and a foreword by Dr. Ron Paul. With discounts for multiple book purchases, the 4th edition of Healing Our World is a great gift for the liberals, pragmatists, environmentalists, and Christians in your life who think libertarianism is cold-hearted. Get yours today at healing.freetalklive.com and use promo code FTL for a $5 discount. If you want to know the latest about Free Talk Live before we go on the air, all you need to decide is how you want it delivered. It's your choice. Visit news.freetalklive.com to receive our usually weekly news updates by email. Plus, we have a Twitter account at twitter.freetalklive.com, and you can follow us on the decentralized Mastodon platform at toot.freetalklive.com. So please follow us at toot.freetalklive.com and sign up for our emails at news.freetalklive.com.
You're listening to the live edition of Free Talk Live. Hour number 3 is next after the news here on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
From Feature Story News in San Francisco, I'm Ira Spitzer. The Republican leader of the U.S. House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, has failed to secure the necessary votes to become Speaker of the House. It's the first time in the past century that a majority party's nominee has faltered on an initial ballot. FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
The Republican leader wasn't able to secure a majority after hard-right lawmakers followed through on their threats to oppose him as Speaker. It's a serious blow for Kevin McCarthy and reveals the deep divisions within the Republican Party. He's vowed to continue forcing multiple votes if necessary. The House remains in limbo as no other business can occur without the election of a Speaker. Kate Fisher, Washington.
The man suspected of killing 4 university students has waived his extradition rights, voluntarily agreeing to return to Idaho to face murder charges. Brian Koberger, a graduate student studying criminology not far from where the fatal stabbings took place, was arrested at his parents' house in Pennsylvania last week. FSN's Tony Waterman has more.
Koberger arrived at the courthouse handcuffed in an orange jumpsuit and escorted by armed officers. When asked by the judge if mental illness would affect his decision, he answered no. The district attorney in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, where Tuesday's hearing took place, said he expected Koberger to be immediately extradited to Idaho. The 28-year-old PhD student is the primary suspect in the fatal stabbings of 4 University of Idaho undergrads in November. It's still unclear what connection Koberger may have had with the victims or a possible motive. Koberger's attorney says his client is shocked by the allegations. Tony Waterman, Texas.
Disgraced former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried has pleaded not guilty in a New York federal court. He faces a myriad of charges, all related to his company's use of customers' funds for fraudulent activities. FSN's Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
In a short court appearance, Sam Bankman-Fried pleaded not guilty to all charges of fraud over the collapse of his bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX. Arriving cleanly shaved and dressed in a blue suit, Bankman-Fried was met by hordes of camera people and reporters outside the court. The former FTX CEO was extradited last month from the Bahamas, where he lived and where the crypto exchange was based. He was released on bond back in December and has had to wear an electronic monitoring device and was required to live with his parents. Already 2 of his close associates have pleaded guilty to fraud charges and have decided to cooperate with prosecutors. If found guilty, Bankman-Fried could spend more than 100 years behind bars.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks, looking in more depth at a violent start to the new year in Ukraine. Russia launched fresh drone and rocket strikes on the country on New Year's Eve itself. Meanwhile, hundreds of Russian soldiers are reported to have been killed when Ukrainian forces fired missiles at a Russian barracks in one of the war's deadliest single attacks. That action is being defended by Arseny Yatsenyuk, who served as Ukraine's prime minister from 2014 until 2016.
We don't know the exact number, but the Ukrainian military already reported that the suggested number of those who have been killed and wounded is around 600 Russian soldiers who illegitimately invaded Ukrainian territory. So I want once again to underline that this is a legitimate military target. And we will kill those Russians who want to kill us. What the hell they are doing on the Ukrainian soil? They have to go back to their home country and to go directly to Kremlin and to press on their president for everything that he has done against Ukraine and against his people. It would be counterproductive for Ukraine to decrease the counteroffensive that Ukrainian military already launched.
Russia confirmed that the attack on the barracks had taken place, but the Kremlin denied the scale of the death toll claimed by Kyiv. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
The main news again. Chaos in the U.S. House of Representatives as Republican leader Kevin McCarthy fails to secure the necessary votes to become Speaker of the House. The man suspected of killing 4 university students in Idaho waives his extradition rights, agreeing to return to the state to face murder charges. And Sam Bankman-Fried pleads not guilty in a New York federal court. That is the latest feature story news. Ira Spitzer reports.
Saying that a few images of displaced refugees would probably do the trick, Americans admitted this week that they could probably be talked into another war. Citizens nationwide told reporters that if they were to see a blurry satellite image of potential nuclear weapons or footage of an evil militant group, they could easily see themselves getting on board with another major military effort.
I'm not saying I'd be gung-ho about it right away, but if they called it something like a concentrated military operation or something other than war at first, I could see myself warming up to the idea. Honestly, just hearing a top official on TV say something like patriotic duty might clinch it.
And in this week's op-ed pages, an area man finds it's just his luck to lose thousands at the blackjack tables every night for the past few weeks. In other news, a senator tries submitting a rejected bill to the Canadian Parliament. What mom would have wanted is evolving over the course of funeral planning, and a new report finds you're actually saving money with a Franklin Skate Center roller rink membership.
This is the Onion News Network.
You can help spread the ideas of liberty with our Patreon for just $5 per month at amps.freetalklive.com.
Free Talk Live. It is Free Talk Live, and the phones are open here. If you want to join the show, the number is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. It's Ian, Aria, and Mark joining you tonight. Of course, you can bring up whatever's on your mind. We were just getting into a news story that we actually first reported on months ago when RT had what was apparently the exclusive on this. RT, for those that don't know, stands for Russia Today, so you know where they're coming at from a editorial perspective.
Well, they were lying. Clearly, they were lying.
No, they were telling the truth.
But that can't be.
No, they do it a lot. Like, from what I can tell, RT is one of the more journalistic. I mean, Mark was, I think, rightfully complaining about the state of journalism these days. It's pretty bad. Like, you pretty much tune into a quote unquote news channel and you're going to get an opinion piece these days. And certainly when you tune into RT, you're going to get the Russian perspective generally on things. But to be fair to them, at least they do cover both sides of the issue in their reporting, from what I've seen.
And that may not be entirely true all the time. Like Adam Kokesh used to have a show on RT, and he was never told, by his own admission or his own reporting, he was never told what to say or what not to say, or what he could and could not talk about.
Holland Kirk also had a show on RT America just before they shut down operations because they couldn't pay their bills due to the sanctions anymore. But
he'd give us a show.
But he's pro-Ukraine, and he was on the air on RT.
Oh, that's right. He leans left, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah. So they never told him what to say. The only reason he can't keep doing his shows is because they shut the whole channel down, and that had nothing to do with him, and had everything to do with the sanctions on the Russian government. They literally could not send the money to their American bank that was operating RT America. So that's why they had to shut that operation.
Thank God the Cold War ended in the 80s and did not persist into 2023.
So what we're talking about here tonight is the what they call the National Council of Television and Radio Broadcasting is now. There's a bill that has now been signed by Vladimir Zelensky that is going to increase their power, not just over broadcasting, but over the internet. Any print media as well. So any newspapers that are left in Ukraine, they're now going to be regulated by the equivalent of their FCC. Any internet sites that are based out of Ukraine are going to have to get a license from the government in order to exist, in order to not have armed thugs kick in their door and throw them into a prison cell.
Can you imagine having to petition the government for a license in order for you out there listening to have a blog?
That's what we're talking about. Yep.
And if you don't, Volodymyr Zelensky is going to send in the jackbooted thugs to drag you out of the house.
Well, in all likelihood, they won't bother people that that are innocuous, but they will use this to go after people who have opinions that they don't like.
Well, good point. Yeah, but then again, the people that love his government would happily line up for a license, most assuredly. But it's got to be
kind of hard to get a license right now with some level of war going on in Ukraine.
But how do you know what level of war? I mean, that's the other thing. We have no idea what's actually going on over there. I mean,
I can tell you that heretofore I have chosen to listen to mainstream media as to what wars are happening and where they are and what's
that's a
occurred
mistake.
during them.
I mean, they absolutely have an incentive to blow up this conflict and make it seem larger than life. But the reality is,
I would agree with that, Ian. But which wars would you say here up to this point are fake?
I'm not saying it's fake. I'm just saying we don't know the extent of it. I do know that this Zelensky character has been parading all over the place, including just showing up, I believe, in Washington, D.C. recently. They've had stars like Bono or whoever going over to Sean Penn, going over to Ukraine, entering into a supposed war zone so they can have photo ops done with Zelensky. I mean, you tell me that that's the most dangerous place to be in the world. I just don't buy it.
I know people who've traveled there, so it can't be terribly dangerous.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think this thing is way blown out of proportion compared to what's actually going on. And then they get this Zelensky guy in D.C., and they're unfurling the Ukrainian flag in Congress now, apparently, and rallying around the Ukrainian flag. Meanwhile, Zelensky...
I wonder when the last time a foreign nation's flag was flown in the U.S. Capitol.
I don't know. It's a good question.
It's probably never happened, not since, the War of 1812, presumably, when the Canadians burned down the White House.
They had a little British help.
According to Zero Hedge, on an article about the same subject, actually came from the Libertarian Institute. They republished it over at Zero Hedge. In March, Zelensky issued a presidential decree which nationalized Ukraine's broadcast media. Remember that one? We talked about it here on Free Talk Live.
Yes, that was when the state took control of the broadcast media
Correct.
in the first place.
Yeah,
when they went socialist.
The kind of stuff that you would see in Venezuela, right? Where they come in, they say, oh, you have yourself a radio station here. Well, it's ours now.
Yeah. We have ourselves a nice radio station here.
Yeah. Thanks for doing all the work setting this up. We'll take that.
We'll run it into the ground for you.
Around the same time, he also banned a long list of opposition political parties, which you referenced earlier, Aria, with alleged links to Russia, and has since taken punitive action against Orthodox churches, also said to have ties with Moscow, especially effectively quashing all dissent under martial law powers. While his power grabs throughout the 11-month conflict have largely gone...
Who's this from?
This is the Libertarian Institute.
Okay. I figured we must have switched off of the New York Times at this point, but I wanted to be sure.
Indeed. According to the story here, while his power grabs have largely gone unnoticed in the American mainstream press, which has devoted ample coverage to similar wartime repression in Russia, the New York Times highlighted calls from human rights groups to rescind this law over fears that it will crush the free press. Ricardo Guterres, the General Secretary for the European Federation of Journalists, said this, quote, Ukraine will demonstrate its European commitment by promoting a free and independent media, not by establishing state control of information, he said. And the Committee to Protect Journalists and other civil rights organizations also slammed the legislation while it was being debated by lawmakers in December. While their legislature agreed to strip away some of the more extreme measures, the final draft still hands the federal government near total control over Ukraine's news media. So there's your freedom-loving Ukraine story. They're going to have given out licenses now for anybody that has a website and anybody that has print publications.
Surely we have callers out there who are pro-Ukraine in this silly little conflict. Can you please call in and explain to me what about the Ukrainian government you think is worth supporting?
Great point.
Well, this is obviously, what they're going to say this is obviously Russian propaganda, and
this is the New York Times. Well, let's hear what they have to say.
Falling for it, and that
this is the New York Times reporting on this.
I thought you said it was the Libertarian Institute.
No, that was the second part of the story. Before we went to the break or whatever it was, I was telling you that this was being reported by the New York Times. I have it right here. Zelensky signs controversial news media regulation, giving the government regulatory power over these things. They've got the story here.
I know, and all the people are going to say is that this stands out as it doesn't look good. I admit, but this is wartime, and sometimes during wartime you got to do these things. I mean, look at old Abe Lincoln. He had to do that kind of thing too.
No, these people would never admit that. I mean, these people allege that Abraham Lincoln was the greatest president in American history. They would never say something like that.
Well, that's the thing. They're just not going to answer the question.
But I've got tattoos of symbols and stuff on me. There's symbols on my car that mean various things, and I have those for a reason. I support those symbols and what they stand for. These people with the Ukrainian flag hanging outside their house or on their Facebook profile. What is it about this institution that is the Ukrainian government that you feel is important enough to stand behind?
I mean, I'll give you a little bit more here from the New York Times. This is from the Times. They're interviewing Ricardo Guterres from the European Federation of Journalists. He called the bill's regulation coercive and worthy of the worst authoritarian regimes. The National Union of Journalists of Ukraine issued a statement before the vote that the bill would help erode the freedoms that, quote, distinguish the social system of Ukraine from the regime of dictatorial Russia. They're saying, look, we had some level of press freedom here, and now you guys are getting rid of that. In fact, I pulled up the index of Reporters Without Borders. They do the index of press freedom, which we actually haven't talked about in some time. Normally we talk about the index of economic freedom and such. Here on Free Talk Live. But this is a very interesting index as well. The United States, by the way, at number 42 on the list of most press freedom on the planet.
What causes America to lose points? I guess the conglomerate.
I mean, look at what they're doing. Look at what they're doing to Julian Assange, for instance.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
Good points.
It's not freedom of speech in the United States, not freedom to report. But let's see, Ukraine. Pulling up here on the map. They've got a text list as well, but Ukraine...
And that would be before this particular act
correct.
has gone into effect.
Yeah, because they always look at like the previous year or whatever. So for the 2022 Reporters Without Borders study, it'll probably be looking at 2020, 2021, somewhere in that range. So right now, before this new law goes into effect, Ukraine is number 106 of all of the 180 countries. So it's not even in the top 100 most free. Russia's at number 155, so even less free than Ukraine.
Are there any countries around Ukraine's ranking that I would recognize one way or the other?
Well, there's right next door, Belarus, not doing so hot at 153.
I mean, someone about whose government I may know a little bit.
How about Honduras?
Okay. I don't know much about the Honduran government, but I seem to think someone on the show does.
Yeah, Mark, guess where Honduras is if you haven't already pulled up the list.
I haven't pulled up the list.
You want to take a guess?
I can't imagine it's terribly high. I mean, there are communists in charge.
After, remember, there's 180 potential spots on this list.
I don't know. Above 100, below 50.
Well, above 100, I guess. Okay, I see what you mean. No,
I don't know what he means. What the hell does he mean?
He means lower than 100, meaning higher ranked, quote
From
unquote.
50 to 100.
Yeah, no, it's 165.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the worst countries on the planet, only beaten out by countries like Iraq, Cuba, Vietnam, Turkmenistan, Iran, Eritrea.
That's
North Korea.
really bad.
Yeah, it's Honduras is actually the worst, excluding Cuba. Honduras is the worst as far as press freedom in the entirety of North and South and Central America.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. And then I wouldn't recommend to anyone who moves to a foreign country for more freedom than they get in the United States, simply because the reach of government in most countries isn't that of the U.S. government. I wouldn't recommend goading the tiger, as it were. I wouldn't say anything about that country in the same way that I wouldn't go to Thailand and say the king is a bad man.
Yeah, you'll be put to death.
That's why I would not go to
if you
Thailand.
do that.
Well, the United States doesn't feel terribly free when they want to come after controversial radio shows.
Oh, it's not. It's number 42.
Radio programs. Well, that's the
number
list
42
on press freedom. But I can assure you that the press freedom people didn't come and ask us about why we think the United States government came after Free Talk Live. So
they didn't need to. They already know that the U.S. sucks at press freedoms. I mean, it's not even in the top 20 here. According to
it's barely in the top 50.
Yeah, it's
barely,
bad.
just barely.
Let's go to the phones
and it
here.
Shouldn't be.
We got a caller on the line here. You're on the air. What's your name?
This is Hadding in Florida.
Hey, what's on your mind? Go on. What's on your mind?
Well, if you want to understand why people are supporting, some people are supporting the war in Ukraine against Russia, I would ask you to look at the overall pattern of U.S. wars. All right, we had this war against Iraq, all right, and we had a series of wars against Muslim states, Libya, and then they were going to do Syria. Some of the others along the way I could explain, but it's more complicated. These are all Zionist wars. These are all wars against enemies of the state of Israel.
Okay.
And what happened with Russia is in 2013, Vladimir Putin put himself in the way and made some statements that discouraged the NATO from going to war against Syria and destroying that country, doing what they had done in Libya. And at that point, Russia became a target. A lot of things happened in short order after that. All right, there were attempts to pry Russia's allies away from her, like the deal with Iran, the nuclear deal, and diplomatic recognition for Cuba, and the XL pipeline was expedited to try to undermine Russia's fuel exports to Europe.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. American antagonism towards Russia dates well before 2013, right?
Not on that level. All right, there were a series of actions.
Seems like it was a
that
lot
happened in very
higher
short
before
order.
2013. I mean, it
I mean,
seems
there
like
was
the
a
United
Cold
States was in a Cold War for decades with Russia, or its predecessor, the Soviet Union. I'm just curious how the
Different
Jews
matter.
got Russia to invade Ukraine.
The situation there is, as you know, the elected government of Ukraine was overthrown in 2014 after the president Yanukovych turned down an offer that you can't refuse, which was to join NATO. All right, he decided not to do it, and then he got overthrown. And Victoria Nuland, a Jewish neoconservative, was right in the middle of all that. All right, and so a government of the Ukraine that was actually rather ambivalent about Russia, but went along with them for practical reasons, was replaced by an actively anti-Russian government. All right. And the goal of this, of overturning the somewhat friendly to Russia government, was to deprive Russia of access to the Black Sea, a warm water port, deprive them of that so that the Russian naval base in Syria would become meaningless, basically getting the Russians out of that region. That was the point of the war, all right? And on top of that, you had the threat of putting missiles into Ukraine that could reach Moscow in 5 minutes. This was a dire threat, a dire military threat to Russia. And
I don't know why other countries have missiles that could hit Russia from thousands upon thousands of miles away. Why is it particularly dangerous for?
It takes a lot longer for them to reach, and it's a lot harder to defend against.
Are you familiar
a missile
with
that's
nuclear
very close.
submarines and Triton nuclear warheads?
Okay, what the USA was trying to do with Ukraine there was very similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy found the presence of missiles in Cuba intolerable, all right, because they would reach cities in the United States so fast, right? It was the same situation.
This is why you become friends with your neighbors instead of invading them and taking their guns away.
And that's right, and that's why weaker countries sometimes have to accommodate the 800-pound gorilla, which happens to be Russia. You have to get along with the big guy in your neighborhood, and if you antagonize him too much, you're going to have a problem. All right, that's just reality, whether you like it or not. Right, and that's what's going on. And fundamentally, this is all about Israeli interests.
I mean, maybe, but I think you misapplied what I was saying. I don't think the United States should have been upset about Russia having missiles in Cuba. The United States should have been like, hey, Cuba, it's okay. We want to have free cooperative trade with you. We want to be friends. And
also,
then it wouldn't have mattered.
Aren't the Nazis running things in Ukraine? How is that helpful to?
No, they're not. No. There's a lot of propaganda about this. I actually know a woman in Ukraine, and she's the kind of person you would call her a Nazi, I think.
Okay.
And she's completely deluded about what's going on. She thinks that Putin is a Jew.
So this Ukrainian Nazi that's telling you what's happening in Ukraine is deluded? Is your argument?
People in Ukraine are very misled by about what's going on. At least they were. And they
How do you know this?
Somehow, I told you, I know a woman over there.
Okay, but she's deluded.
Nazis in Ukraine.
But you said she's deluded. And she's a Nazi in Ukraine, as Mark points out.
I could not reason with her about anything. I point out that, Zelensky's a Jew, and she just kind of blew it off.
Is Zelensky a Jew? See, I don't spend
Supposedly.
any time, terribly sorry, I don't spend any time trying to figure out who's a Jew and who's not a Jew, and what the Jews want on a national level.
Supposedly he is Jewish, and his name allegedly translates to like the evil one or something like that.
Is it Bonnie Jewish or something?
He's not only Jewish, he's a Zionist Jew. He's been to the state of Israel. He's anti-Palestinian, all this stuff.
I mean, there is no doubt that the Israeli government has an incredibly large influence over other governments of the world for whatever stupid religious reason that it does. So I don't.
Well, it might just because they got trapped their politicians into trysts with 13-year-olds.
I suspect it has a lot more to do with the fact that a third of the world's religious people, the Jews, are God's chosen people. and that they worship that God.
What's going on here is we've got these people who are very influential in the U.S. political establishment called neoconservatives, and I pointed out Victoria Nuland was right in the middle of all this stuff where the Ukrainian government was overthrown and trying to get NATO in there. All right, these people are extremely influential in our political establishment. They have their collaborators in the U.S. media, like the New York Times. Why do you think that the false propaganda about Iraq was allowed to go on and on and on without any mass media saying that's not true? It's because they're all
I'm just
on the same
wondering,
side.
like, I've got an English last name. I mean, are there conspiracy theorists out there that just find people with English last names, wrap them all together in their conspiracy, and then trot out some racist crap?
Well, I don't hear any racist.
The LaRouche
Well,
people do
okay,
that.
it's really close to that.
He's throwing out a lot of dog whistles.
I didn't hear anything about racism here.
He said the Jews over and over again.
He's talking about Israel, which is not the same thing as the Jews. That's a government.
I'm being more specific than that, but it happened. Yeah, I recognize the voice. This is the guy who says that true statement is racist. I recognize.
Aha! He's a Cantwell listener. That's right.
So
there you go.
So what?
That's all I need.
I listened to Cantwell's show last week, or at least a good chunk of
I
it.
understand you have a favorite Nazi.
But you know, this is another thing. The way people use that word Nazi.
There you go.
That's all I need.
Mark called it. I got to say, Mark, you did
This
call
guy
it.
plays dog whistles like a pan flute.
Well, look, I don't know what you're saying here, Mark, because this guy's talking about
I'm saying he's a bigot, and he'll use the term Zionist to.
Are you anti-Jewish, sir?
Look, I'm talking about particular Jews.
Particular Jews, exactly, and I get that. And then the people that are in the government over in Israel, these are bad people.
But that's government people.
Well, right.
This guy,
the Israeli government is backed by some of the most powerful governments on the planet, and they are destroying the lives of these Palestinian people constantly. I mean, there's no doubt about that. That's not anti-Jewish. That's anti-government. That's a fact. Thanks for the call. More coming up here. On Free Talk Live, we're bringing people to the ideas of liberty every day. From wrestling superstars like Glenn Jacobs.
You guys really are having an impact, I believe. Like I said, a lot of where I am now is due to listening to Free Talk Live. You changed my mind on some very important issues years ago.
To random people tuning in on the radio.
I was kind of stuck in the left-right paradigm. I heard your show by chance on a Saturday night. From there, I went on, joined the Free State Project, and become an amplifier. So, I mean, that's really the reason why I amp is because I know that if it wasn't for you guys being on as many stations as you are, I never would have found the ideas of liberty.
You can help more people hear the message of liberty by joining Free Talk Live's AMPS program on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. And you'll get access to special perks. Visit amps.freetalklive.com, amps.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in San Francisco, I'm Ira Spitzer. The Republican leader of the U.S. House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, has failed to secure the necessary votes to become Speaker of the House. It's the first time in the past century that a majority party's nominee has faltered on an initial ballot. FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
The Republican leader wasn't able to secure a majority after hard-right lawmakers followed through on their threats to oppose him as Speaker. It's a serious blow for Kevin McCarthy and reveals the deep divisions within the Republican Party. He's vowed to continue forcing multiple votes if necessary. The House remains in limbo as no other business can occur without the election of a Speaker. Kate Fisher, Washington.
The man suspected of killing 4 university students has waived his extradition rights, voluntarily agreeing to return to Idaho to face murder charges. Brian Koberger, a graduate student studying criminology not far from where the fatal stabbings took place, was arrested at his parents' house in Pennsylvania last week. FSN's Tony Waterman has more.
Kohberger arrived at the courthouse handcuffed in an orange jumpsuit and escorted by armed officers. When asked by the judge if mental illness would affect his decision, he answered no. The district attorney in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, where Tuesday's hearing took place, said he expected Kohberger to be immediately extradited to Idaho. The 28-year-old PhD student is the primary suspect in the fatal stabbings of 4 University of Idaho undergrads in November. It's still unclear what connection Kohberger may have had with the victims or a possible motive. Kohberger's attorney says his client is shocked by the allegations. Tony Waterman, Texas.
Disgraced former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried has pleaded not guilty in a New York federal court. He faces a myriad of charges, all related to his company's use of customers' funds for fraudulent activities. FSN's Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
In a short court appearance, Sam Bankman-Fried pleaded not guilty to all charges of fraud over the collapse of his bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX. Arriving cleanly shaved and dressed in a blue suit, Bankman-Fried was met by hordes of camera people and reporters outside the court. The former FTX CEO was extradited last month from the Bahamas, where he lived and where the crypto exchange was based. He was released on bond back in December and has had to wear an electronic monitoring device and was required to live with his parents. Already 2 of his close associates have pleaded guilty to fraud charges and have decided to cooperate with prosecutors. If found guilty, Bankman-Fried could spend more than 100 years behind bars.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this
Yep, we still do email. Drop your email address in the entry box at freetalklive.com and you'll be kept in the loop with Free Talk Live.
It's Free Talk Live, and the phones are open here. You can join the show at 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. We are doing things a little bit differently starting this year, starting a couple days ago. You may have noticed fewer commercials, fewer commercial breaks. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, it flows so much better, and the show goes by so much more organically and so much faster. I mean,
yeah, we can get deeper into conversations without interruption. It's awesome.
You and I, we very easily do shows without any show prep, but this is 2 nights in a row where we did some without hardly ever even touching it, and it's
a nice thing.
New.
It's a nice thing. I've been enjoying this a lot. Mark, it's your first new show in the new year. What are you thinking about this new format?
It's pretty seamless because, to be honest, until you mentioned it just now, I didn't realize what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed, as we're in the middle of the segment.
And I am generally the naysayer, the one that says that everything sucks, that you got to do it the old way. And I'm really hoping that this this format is better.
Well, the only problem I think is we should have done it 10 years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't think about it until September. And
you talked about it previously, doing it.
Okay.
There were things that stood in the way.
Yeah. Well, now we just said, you know what? This has to happen. It's critical. We got to do this, and we have. So we're going to go back to your phone calls and thoughts. Phones are open at 603-283-6160. Let's go to Bob. He's listening in West Virginia on the radio to WVTS in Charleston. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, people don't understand something about the Ukraine conflict here. They think that this wild man Putin, just out of the clear blue sky, decided to go in and wreak mayhem on his neighbors. Not true. Putin invaded the Ukraine after the U.S. rejected his demand for a guarantee that the Ukraine not join NATO. You see, Ukrainian diplomats, they were doing just fine. Ukrainian diplomats had negotiated a deal with the EU, and then Russia trumped the EU by, they outbid the EU with their own deal. They made a deal,
My question would be, why can't, if Ukraine wants to join NATO, shouldn't they have that right as a sovereign nation?
No, NATO agreed to not expand toward Russia.
Let me answer that. You see, NATO is comprised of a plurality of U.S. troops. Now, the invitation was to both Georgia and the Ukraine to join NATO. had they joined NATO, all of a sudden you'll have U.S. troops on thousands of miles of your border. That is the same thing as putting rockets in Cuba.
Well, plus, Bob, don't
And,
forget that what happened at the end of the Soviet Union, as I understand it, was there was an agreement that NATO would not expand, that it was no longer needed to grow because the Soviet Union was going down, and NATO said, "This is it. We're not going to expand," and they broke their promise and have continually expanded.
Well, let's not forget that Estonia and Latvia NATO members?
Well, that's another question. I'm talking about what's between Russia and the Ukraine. And
But
their
very
fear
likely
of
Finland
having
will
their
become a
border-
NATO member as a result of this invasion into Ukraine, right? So Putin's gambit is going to backfire, and he's going to in fact have these missiles and troops for good reason, because he's a madman all along his border.
But you understand why he's upset. He had a deal with the Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, and he signed it. But then the U.S. steps in and puts $5 billion to influence Ukraine's politics, pays for all of these protests across the country. People are shot dead, and so Yanukovych flees the country.
That's one of the cheapest revolutions in history.
Well, it's up to 110 billion now,
Well,
just
you
the
gotta
last year.
understand that Ukrainians make less money per person,
Still
than
$5
in
billion
Cuba,
to overthrow
Jamaica,
a
or
government?
Namibia. I'm sorry?
Still only $5 billion to overthrow a government? That's a bargain.
Like I said, I predicated that with the notion that the people there are basically a third world country when each individual makes less than your average Cuban, Jamaican, or Namibian. These are that's third world wages.
Interesting you mentioned Namibia. It happens to be number 18 on the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index. So this country in South Africa, which is like basically a desert, has more press freedoms than even the United States does. Now, of course, $5 billion is like chump change. Ukraine's gotten $110 billion from the United States taxpayers in just the last
Isn't that something?
year.
How about that? War sure does pay off, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. Look, I think I get what you're saying here, Bob. The NATO people broke their promise to Russia. They said they weren't going to expand, and they've continuously expanded. So, yeah, I mean, you can't really blame Putin for
NATO's whole
for what he
purpose is
did.
to take down Russia.
But that doesn't mean we have to say that Putin's a nice guy. A lot of oligarchs have flipped on banana peels and fallen to their death out of high rises.
Oh yeah,
So,
Putin's he's a thug, of course, but so is Joe Biden.
Of course he is.
So is Joe Biden.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I think that's a pretty good assessment of who we're dealing with. Yes, sir. But you understand, he's strictly dealing with the security of his own regime when he keeps NATO troops off of his border, which are largely comprised of U.S. troops, and even the generals involved are, on many occasions, U.S. generals.
Thank you, Bob, for calling and sharing those thoughts tonight. I definitely appreciate it.
And I can't really say that, Russia should just extend the olive branch to NATO and the United States. Well, hey, look, we want to be your friends. We don't care that you have missiles and soldiers here because we want to be your friends and engage in this open trade with you because Russia did that. I remember Putin throughout his entire presidency during the George W. Bush era. He routinely referred to George W. Bush as his partner, and the United States were his partners, his friends, and the United States never returned that level of that companionship to Russia. Russia was always a lesser country, and it will always be a lesser country in the eyes of Americans. Never an equal, never a trading partner.
Well, it was a trading partner.
I think Russia should have been allowed membership into NATO, and that this would have, solved the whole problem. NATO's not going anywhere. In fact, NATO's a pretty good idea because it allows Europe to keep their military spending down. And look, as a libertarian, I don't like warlike organizations, but I can look at the world in a reasonable fashion, and it seems to me that Russia is a power on the wane. But that's not to say it's not a power. And the best use of NATO would be to combine with Russia. That way, you're not worried about it anymore. That way, the eye of NATO can focus towards China, who they can then keep in line a lot more easily.
Let's go to Major Payne on the line in Michigan. Go ahead, Major.
Yeah, I got a couple of news blips I thought were kind of intriguing, and then I got a quote from Frank Zappa that kind of ties into what you're talking about here. The news blips are that, remember that 4 college or 3 co-eds and 1 dude were murdered out, knifed to death a while back out in Idaho?
Yeah, we haven't covered that story, but interestingly, they're calling the alleged murderer a quote-unquote libertarian in the news. That's part of that story.
Evidently a PhD student just across the border in the next state in criminology.
Mm.
Yeah, he was trying to, I don't know, it's kind of weird, but it makes me think of why the normal mind cannot perceive of the thoughts of the criminal, because we just can't put ourselves in them damn shoes.
I'm not surprised. I mean, it's inevitable that you're going to get a trans serial killer at one point. You're going to get a libertarian serial killer at one point. You're going to get a gay serial killer. Well, you've had a few of those. But it's just basic statistics.
If you're a serial killer, then by definition, you're not a libertarian, right?
Well, you're not a principled libertarian.
You're a crazy person.
Yeah.
All right, so the other one was old Bankman Fried is looking at 100 years.
Yeah, he's pleading not guilty in that case, at least at this point. Maybe waiting for a plea deal.
100 years, that's nothing,
Chump
man.
change, right?
Yeah, you were facing 420. I think I was, by the end of the indictment, I think I had 200 and something.
200, yeah, some.
All right, so I got here a book of Webster's Dictionary of Quotations. And there's only one entrance from Frank Zappa. It's under the headline of beliefs. And it says, the fact of the matter is there is no hip world. There is no straight world. There is a world, you see, which has people in it who believe in a variety of different things. Everybody believes in something. And everybody, by virtue of the fact that they believe in something, uses that something to support their own existence.
Yep.
Thanks, Major. Appreciate the call tonight.
I was worried it was going to be like Frank Brown Goes to Town. So I don't remember the name of the song, but Frank Zappa's got Somebody Brown Goes to Town. It's not what you would expect.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know enough about Frank Zappa. I know that he was supposedly a libertarian, though.
Was he?
Yeah.
He wrote some interesting music.
Oh, you'll take him, but not the Idaho serial killer. I gotcha.
Was Frank Zappa a serial killer?
No.
Okay, then that's why.
He also said,
the
has he
definition of a
understands
libertarian is someone who doesn't agree with the use of force, the use of offensive or aggressive force, and a serial killer would be someone who's using that. So obviously not a libertarian.
Yep. I don't know if he was a serial killer. What is the word for that?
That's the alleged serial killer.
Well, he wasn't a serial killer because he only committed one act. It was just there were multiple victims in that one act.
Ooh,
he's the mass shooter.
No, I don't know if he was a
mass
shooter.
killer, I think
Mass
is the
stabber.
word.
Yeah, I think he allegedly was a stabber, in that case.
Either way, not a libertarian.
No, pretty ugly, though, in that. I don't know all the details in that case, but
I don't either. I saw it and I was like, okay, that's awful, but it's not like show prep, so I didn't.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt
read it.
about it. You know what, Mark? I didn't even get a chance to ask you before the show. Was there something you wanted to talk about tonight?
I have a list of show prep, but it's not on the top of my screen now with the with 15 minutes left in the show.
Indeed. The number here is 603-283-6160. Americans are apparently largely pessimistic about the prospects for the United States in 2023.
Are Americans becoming realistic?
I don't know.
No. I disagree with this assertion. So in order to be number one, you simply have to be faster than number two. And I got to find out who number two is at this point, because it should be apparent, right? Like if you're losing a race, you should be able to turn around and look.
What are you saying? Hold on. What are you saying the United States is number one in?
Well, it's certainly the world's largest
prison
economy.
Inmates.
It's that too. Unless you consider everybody in North Korea to actually be in a prison.
I would not.
Okay.
I mean, there's a strong argument that North Korea is essentially a prison colony. You can't get out. Like, there's literally barbed wire.
I can't get out of the United States either.
Yeah, that's true.
Sure you can. Well, you
No,
can.
she cannot.
Right. So, I mean, it's all a matter of perspective, I would argue. But there are literally people in American, millions of people in American prisons for victimless crimes. And the United States has the largest prison population in the world.
Do you think that a nation is necessarily doomed to because of a large prison population? Because I don't.
Probably.
I'm not saying it's good. I don't.
I think that probably does speak to some sort of institutional overgrowth and spiritual rot within that nation.
I think what it speaks to is just more make-work programs and a particularly harsh pioneer spirit.
Slavery suggests a dying empire to me.
No, slavery is all over the world, and all the empires that rose and all the empires that fell had slavery heretofore. Slavery was commonplace and not even argued with up until basically the beginning of the 19th century. Then, people's morals kicked in, and they stopped looking
Slavery
at it.
persists today. They just called it something else. As you said,
now it's taxes.
These make-work programs, I mean, it's widespread slavery.
Well, no. So from Ian just called slavery taxes. I would disagree with that notion. However,
what percentage of your wealth has to be taken from you for the benefit of someone else before it counts as slavery?
It can be any percentage as long as you agree to it.
But
as long as you agree to it.
You agree to the taxes of the United States by remaining.
It's a ridiculous
in the same way
statement.
that you agree to pay your bill when you go into a restaurant.
That is a ridiculous take.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
I can choose to go to a different restaurant. I never in my life.
Indeed, you can go to a different country.
No,
well, not
she
you.
can't.
And
I got it.
And either
Look,
before
Aria is under bail conditions. And I'm
even
sorry.
before the bail conditions.
Okay.
The average person cannot just go, I'm done with the United States. I'm going to pack up and carry on my life into Honduras. That's so beyond and I realize that you've been millionaire, Mark, for so long you don't understand this anymore, but this is well beyond the means of your average fast food worker.
Well, I don't think the average fast food worker is the average American.
I think you would find they are.
Things. I don't. I would disagree.
What do you
and I
think
could look
the
up
average
numbers.
American makes?
I don't have that in front of me, but I would say that median incomes in the United States is somewhere around $70,000 for a household.
Good Lord, that's way off. It's going to be closer to $30,000, man.
He said for a household. That may be true for a household. I don't know, but still.
Either way, he is looking up. But
median household income, for whatever reason, it wants to go with New Hampshire here. In New Hampshire, median household income is $83,000.
Regardless, Mark, it is well beyond the capabilities of the average person to just move to a different country.
Most people live paycheck to paycheck, and we've seen the numbers on this recently. It's like 60-something% of Americans are one paycheck away from losing everything.
Just about anybody can get a passport, and they can go work paycheck to paycheck someplace else if that's what they want.
How are they going to afford that?
You know what a plane ticket costs, right?
How much is a passport? It's about $150. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
$150 that they don't have because they're already living paycheck to paycheck. There are people who cannot afford it. Half of Americans can't afford that $150, Mark. That's a lot of money.
I disagree with that. If you were to ask a slave throughout history, so $150 is what, 2 days income at minimum wage? If you were to ask
you did hear the part where they live paycheck to paycheck, right? And they don't have
that's a
$150.
decision that they make with their cigarette smoking and their beer drinking.
Oh,
lay off
if they just laid off the Starbucks, they'd be able to buy themselves a house.
Listen to me.
I bought a house at my age.
Listen to me. If you were to ask the average slave throughout history if 2 days' work was a sufficient amount to free them, if it was a generous offer, I think they would say yes.
That only gets them the
you're
passport.
like, oh, I'm a millennial. I need a Starbucks.
Mark, that only gets them the passport. That gets them no closer to anything. All that gets is a government sheet of paper saying, hey, look, technically, you can go when you want.
That's all it takes.
It is not all it takes.
What, are they going to walk to Bolivia?
Physically move somewhere else. Most people have family that they would have to bring with them. They have costs involved in moving. Now, I guess you could say you could just sell everything, right? And that's always a good idea, right? You want to sell a lot of stuff.
If they have something to own, but some people don't.
Before you move. But then you got to figure out where you're going to move to. What are you going to do when you get there exactly? The average person doesn't have the ability to work remotely, Mark. Like you do.
to put the dilemma of somebody who's made poor financial decisions their entire life and then tell me solve their problem in 1 week.
We're not telling you to do
Some
that.
of these people never had a chance to make bad financial decisions, Mark. Some of these people are just born from poor families.
We're just trying to explain to you that people are not in the same circumstances as you. They don't have a remote
I don't know
job.
that. I grew up in a house. We didn't have a washer and a dryer.
Okay, well, you seem to have forgotten, where you came from.
I haven't forgotten anything. You act like these people can't solve their problems, and they can. You can make good financial decisions.
I'm not sure that moving from the United States to the Honduras is going to
I'm
solve
not
their
recommending
problems.
you move to the United States in the same way that you don't recommend people move to New Hampshire poor.
You just recommended. Actually, no, I've told people, look, I mean, there have been success stories of people who've come here with the shirt on their back and they've made it work. I don't recommend it, but it can be done. And I'm sure the same thing can be done for somebody who wants to go.
Very little when I got here.
Right. I'm sure the same thing can be done for somebody who wants to move down to Honduras and work for, 5 cents an hour or whatever the hell you get paid on a farm there, or, working at a restaurant for a fraction of what you'd get paid here in the United States. That's the other challenge is what does somebody do when they get down there? And they don't know where to begin with anything like that.
It's a new world. I think it's best if what you're doing is you're boxing me in and you're saying, Mark, solve their problems. And I'm not here to solve their problems. I'm here to say that if you make a decision to remain within a system, then it's not theft anymore.
They don't have the resources to lead the system, Mark. $150 only gets you the passport.
If they choose to.
You got a gun to your head. They say if you don't pay, you come to our cage or we'll kill you. That is absolutely extortion, 100%. That's what that is. And just because you're saying if you pay the extortion gang $150, they'll let you go to some other place where another gang is going to do the exact same thing to them is hardly saying that those people have a choice or have some sort of semblance or a shot at freedom.
Let's put a number on it. Plus, when that gun is to your head, but for $5,000, you can move to this other place. Because that's ultimately what it's probably going to take. To move to another country and establish oneself and not starve to death and be homeless.
Yeah, you're going to need a few bucks.
I would estimate at least $5,000. That includes everything.
Started,
travel expenses. Yeah.
Seems fair. That seems on the low end.
Yeah. So these people who live paycheck to paycheck have to save up $5,000.
I think it differs vastly for different countries. So, for instance, I'm going to Morazan City right now. You can find the website at morazan.city, and I currently rent a place there for call it $200 a month.
Okay,
what do you do for work there?
What's that?
What do you do for work there?
Well, I don't. I'm going to be moving Free Talk Live, or at least my operation of Free Talk Live there.
Okay, but you're not working in Morazan City.
What could this person who's living paycheck to paycheck do there?
Look, I don't know. I'm not here to tell everybody. I can't design a marketplace.
I'm not asking you to. I'm just trying to get you to understand that what you're saying is really easy is not at all easy for someone who doesn't
I'm not
have
saying
millions of
it's
dollars.
easy. I'm saying you opt into it by making the decisions you make every single day.
That's blaming the victim, dude.
Stop making bad decisions. You'll stop getting bad results.
You cannot sit there and say that what these people are doing is a bad decision for simply trying to make things work where they are and take care of their families where they are, and yet then excuse the government and saying that what the government is doing is totally
excusing
fine.
the government. It's highly inefficient. It's just.
But you're saying you're excusing them by saying it's not theft or it's not extortion, and it absolutely is.
Look, man, all you're doing is saying that, you're calling it a slave plantation when you can walk off.
But
And
to
it's not a
another
slave
plantation. You
The
can't
thing
walk
that-
off. You need
the thing that makes
$5,000 to walk off.
Yes, you can.
You
The
need
slavery-
resources
the
that these people don't have.
The thing that makes slavery is that somebody will point a gun in your face and say, if you try to leave this land, I'm going to smoke you. Okay? And that's not what's happening here, so it's not slavery.
Oh, it's not. So what do you call it then when you can leave plantation A and then go to plantation B where they'll then put a gun to your head?
A choice between plantations. They're not putting a gun to your head.
Oh my God, I can actually see your face, and you are serious. He is serious about this.
I cannot wait to clip that for TikTok.
Yeah,
Mark,
you got to
'cause
clip
that
that
was,
one.
that
Make
was
a note.
solid. Wow.
Unbelievable. I mean, the level of delusion to say something like
I
that.
like that you can see his face. I've been wondering about that.
You've got choices, and it's not even 200 nations. It's far more than that. There's all kinds of different choices, and if you decide to take a look rather than just saying, woe is me, I'm a modern-day slave, you're not.
That's not necessarily true for everyone, Mark. I mean, there are not 200 options. Like, for me, forgetting the bail restrictions and all of that, there are nowhere near 200 countries in the United States that I could live at safely and productively. There just aren't.
Not as a felon, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, if you take all of that out, right, you immediately lose all of Africa, all of the Middle East, a lot of Asia. You basically leave and most of South America.
Yeah, here's what I want to know. You work at a pizza place.
Yep.
And that pizza place probably exists in other countries. I know it does in Mexico, for instance. They make the pizza differently from what I understand, but they do exist there. What do you think they pay hourly?
Ooh, in Mexico?
Or in Honduras? Or in any of these Central American companies?
Maybe $1, $2 an hour?
If you're going to work at a pizza place...
Yes, like you say that mockingly, like it's not a way that's keeping millions of people in the United States alive each day. It's paying their bills and keeping their families fed.
See, it's a great idea if you are a digital nomad. If you're somebody who can make money online, you've got you're an influencer or whatever.
Most digital nomads are poor, and I don't know why you're belittling what they do.
Why are you belittling pizza makers?
I'm not belittling it at all. I'm saying
I'm saying if you think you're going to go to a foreign country and make pizzas and survive, you're not.
That's the
exactly
problem,
the
Mark. The point is, I'm not belittling digital nomads. The digital nomads are able to make this work because they can work from anywhere. A lot of people have a certain set of skills that they developed, and they cannot do the same thing, or certainly make as much. Anyway, out of time tonight. We'll see you tomorrow online, freetalklive.com. The Free State Project has reached its goal of 20,000 liberty lovers who've pledged to move to New Hampshire and get active to achieve liberty in our lifetime. Perhaps you're trying to figure out what part of New Hampshire should be your destination. If so, consider Keene. You'll find more than 150 reasons to move to Keene at move.freekeene.com. Keene is famous for its historic, publicity-generating activism, as well as being the liberty media capital of the world. It's home to freekeene.com, New Hampshire's destination for liberty activism, news, and opinion. For years, we've been compiling over 150 reasons to move to Keene at move.freekeene.com, where you'll learn about some of what's happening here and what makes Keene a great place to live. If you love liberty, you'll probably enjoy anywhere you end up in the Shire.